Hello.
Sare ga pa dha pa ga pa dha pa ga pa ga re. Sare ga re sa pa ga re sa pa ga re dha pa ga sa dha pa ga re sa dha sare ga re ga. Sare ga re ga pa da sare ga re sa dha pa ga re sa dha sa.
I think what we are talking about this year's budget, I think two important areas come out very clear. One is we are talking. I think what we are talking about this year's budget, I think two important areas come out very clear. One is we are talking about demonetization, which is essentially bringing in a lot of electronic transactions and other things. And on the other hand, we are having the Make in India. So when we are talking of demonetization and Make in India, we are talking of two different areas, because Make in India will lead people with low skills, vocational skills to go quickly on job. Whereas demonetization and use of technology will need a lot of highly educated and skilled and qualified people to meet the requirements of the government. So I think it is very important that government policy has a very specific and directed focus on these two areas separately, because the needs of these two areas are there, and since the government policy seems to be to promote both these areas, whereby you have technology to substitute for monetization, to do demonetization, and on the other hand you need make in India basic skills to get into manufacturing industry. I think the policy should focus very specifically in both these areas to make success out of both these areas.
2017-18 കേന്ദ്ര ബജറ്റിൽ സത്യത്തിൽ ഞാൻ പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നത് ഇൻഫ്രാസ്ട്രക്ചറിന് നല്ല ഊന്നൽ കാണും. പിന്നെ രണ്ടാമതായിട്ട് കാർഷിക മേഖലയ്ക്ക് ഇപ്പോൾ 1.2% ആണ് റേറ്റ് ഓഫ് ഗ്രോത്ത് ഈ 16-17 റെക്കോർഡ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത്. അത് പല സംസ്ഥാനങ്ങളിലും വരൾച്ചയുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ അതുകൊണ്ടായിരിക്കണം, കാരണം എന്താ വെച്ചാൽ ഡിമോണിറ്റൈസേഷനുമായിട്ട് അതിനെ ലിങ്ക് ചെയ്യേണ്ടത് വന്നിട്ടില്ല ഇപ്പോൾ ഇതുവരെയും. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെയാകുമ്പോൾ ആ വരൾച്ചയൊക്കെ കാരണം കൊണ്ട് 1.6%. ഇപ്പം കാർഷിക മേഖലയ്ക്ക് കഴിഞ്ഞ ബജറ്റിൽ പറഞ്ഞിരുന്നു വൺ ഡ്രോപ്പ് മോർ ക്രോപ്പ്, ഓരോ തുള്ളി വെള്ളത്തിൽ നിന്നും. കാരണം ഇന്ത്യ ലോകത്തിന്റെ 17% ജനസംഖ്യ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ 4% ശുദ്ധജലമേ ഇന്ത്യയിലുള്ളൂ എന്നുള്ളതാണ് കണക്ക്. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെ ആകുമ്പോൾ ഓരോ തുള്ളി വെള്ളവും പ്രൊഡക്റ്റീവായിട്ട്, അപ്പൊ അതിന് ഇപ്പോഴും ഫോക്കസ് കാണും. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നബാർഡ് വഴി കൂടുതൽ പണം, ഇപ്പോൾ ഒരു 20,000 കോടിയുടെ ഡിക്ലറേഷൻ വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ അതിനേക്കാൾ കൂടുതലായിട്ട് കാർഷിക മേഖലയിലേക്ക്, കാരണം കാർഷിക മേഖല അതായത് പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് വാട്ടർ ടേബിൾ താണുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ വെള്ളത്തിന്റെ ഉപയോഗം വളരെ കാര്യക്ഷമമാക്കിക്കൊണ്ട് ഉൽപാദനം വളരെ വർദ്ധിപ്പിക്കുക എന്ന തോതിൽ ഒരു ക്രോപ്പുകളുടെ തെരഞ്ഞെടുപ്പിൽ തന്നെ മാറ്റം വരും. ക്രോപ്പ് ഷിഫ്റ്റിംഗ് ഉണ്ടാകും. അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ എല്ലാത്തരം ഇൻപുട്സിന്റെ യൂസിൽ ഒക്കെ ഇക്കോണമിക്കലായിട്ടുള്ള മാറ്റങ്ങൾ വരാൻ സാധ്യതയുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെ കാർഷിക രംഗം, പിന്നെ ചെറുകിട നാമമാത്ര സംരംഭങ്ങൾ MSME സെക്ടർ, ഈ സെക്ടർ അതായത് ഇപ്പൊ നമ്മൾ ഒരു ഡിമോണിറ്റൈസേഷന്റെ ഒക്കെ ഫലമായിട്ട് ഒരു മാന്ദ്യത്തിലേക്ക് പോയിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഇപ്പോഴും നല്ല, എന്റെ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ കേരളം കഴിഞ്ഞ 2-3 വർഷങ്ങളായിട്ട് മാന്ദ്യാവസ്ഥ, ഈ കേരളമല്ല ഇന്ത്യ മാന്ദ്യാവസ്ഥയിലാണ്. കാരണം വിലകൾ തീരെ താഴ്ന്നു നിൽക്കുകയാണ്. വിലകൾ താഴ്ന്നു നിൽക്കുന്നതിന്റെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട കാരണം സർവ്വസാധാരണക്കാരുടെ കയ്യിലും പാർശ്വവൽക്കരിക്കപ്പെട്ടവരുടെ കയ്യിലും ക്രയശേഷി ഇല്ലെന്നുള്ളതാണ്. അപ്പൊ അവരിലേക്ക് ക്രയശേഷി എത്തിക്കാനുള്ള സംരംഭങ്ങൾ കൂടിയേ തീരൂ. എങ്കിൽ മാത്രമേ ഈ മാന്ദ്യത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഇന്ത്യ മറികടക്കുകയും അത് ചെറുകിട വ്യവസായ മേഖലയാണെങ്കിലും വ്യാവസായിക മേഖലയാണെങ്കിലും ഒരു പുനരുജ്ജീവനത്തിന്റെ രീതിയിലേക്ക് എത്തിച്ചേരുകയും ചെയ്യും.
ഈ ബജറ്റ് നമ്മുടെ സ്വതന്ത്ര ഭാരതത്തിൽ ഇതുവരെ അവതരിപ്പിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ബജറ്റിൽ നിന്നും ഏറെ വ്യത്യസ്തമായിരിക്കും. വലിയ സുപ്രധാനമായ സാമ്പത്തിക മാറ്റങ്ങൾക്കൊപ്പം അവതരിപ്പിക്കുന്ന ബജറ്റാണ്. ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനം ഇപ്പൊ നമ്മൾ ഏറെ ചർച്ച ചെയ്യപ്പെട്ടുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന ഈ നോട്ട് അസാധുവാക്കൽ, അത് രാജ്യത്തുണ്ടാകാൻ പോകുന്ന ഗുണകരമായ മാറ്റങ്ങൾ. മറ്റൊന്ന് GST, രണ്ടാം സാമ്പത്തിക വിപ്ലവം എന്ന് വിശേഷിപ്പിക്കാൻ കഴിയുന്ന GST. ഇതിന്റെ രണ്ടിന്റെയും ഗുണം അനുഭവിച്ചു തുടങ്ങുന്ന വർഷമായിരിക്കും ഈ ബജറ്റ് വർഷം. തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും അതിന്റെ ഗുണം രാജ്യത്തൊട്ടാകെ ഉണ്ടാകും. കേരളം പോലൊരു ഉപഭോക്തൃ സംസ്ഥാനത്തിന് വളരെയധികം സാമ്പത്തിക ഞെരുക്കത്തിൽ കഴിയുന്ന കേരളത്തിന് വളരെയധികം മെച്ചമുണ്ടാകാൻ സാധ്യതയുള്ള ബജറ്റാണ്. കേരളത്തിന്റെ അടിസ്ഥാന സൗകര്യ വികസനത്തിന് വേണ്ടി കേന്ദ്രം എന്തെല്ലാം ചെയ്യാൻ തയ്യാറായാലും സംസ്ഥാനത്തിന്റെ താൽപര്യങ്ങൾ സംരക്ഷിക്കണമെന്ന് ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നവർ അത് വാങ്ങിയെടുക്കാൻ പ്രാപ്തിയാവണം.
കാർഷിക മേഖലയുടെ പുനരുദ്ധാരണത്തിലൂടെ മാത്രമേ കേരള സമ്പദ് വ്യവസ്ഥയ്ക്ക് മുന്നേറാൻ കഴിയൂ. സംസ്ഥാനം അതിഭയങ്കരമായ ഒരു ധനകാര്യ പ്രതിസന്ധി നേരിട്ടുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന സാഹചര്യം, സംസ്ഥാനത്തിന്റെ കടമെടുക്കുന്നതിനുള്ള പരിധി ഉയർത്തുകയും കൂടുതൽ കേന്ദ്ര സഹായം നൽകുകയും ചെയ്യേണ്ടതായിട്ടുള്ള ആവശ്യമുണ്ട്. നോട്ട് പിൻവലിക്കലിന്റെ ഫലമായി കേരളത്തെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം നികുതി വരുമാനത്തിൽ വൻ കുറവാണ് ഉണ്ടാകാൻ പോകുന്നത്. കേന്ദ്രാവിഷ്കൃത പദ്ധതികൾ പലതും ഇല്ലാതായ സാഹചര്യത്തിൽ അത്തരം പദ്ധതികൾ തുടർന്നു പോകുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള കൂടുതൽ കേന്ദ്ര സഹായം നൽകും എന്ന് തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും കേരളം പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കും.
The number one in the list is to increase allocation as a percentage of GDP. For a country of our size, having an allocation of 1.2 as we saw in the previous years is quite poor, and we need to really push up the number to at least 2.53% of GDP. That's the number one wish list. In terms of access to all citizens, it is essential for the budget to make an allocation for the universal health insurance policy, which was already announced in the last budget by FM Jaitley. On the same lines, we need to build enormous amount of infrastructure. Infrastructure currently existing in healthcare is abysmally poor. For that, more tax stops may have to be given for capex expenditure in healthcare, primarily in Tier 2, Tier 3 cities and in rural areas. The number 2 priority where healthcare is concerned is in terms of affordability, which I talked about in terms of having more element of subsidies, and also to bring in an umbrella payer mechanism to ensure that more and more people can afford healthcare. The concept of health insurance need to be actively promoted so that out-of-pocket expenditure can be minimized. The third aspect is assurance. All citizens in the country have a right to demand a minimum basic quality of healthcare across facilities, whether it's public sector or private sector. Some kind of fund allocation have to be made to ensure NABH accreditation across all public hospitals and private hospitals. The second element of quality of care is to have a third-party monitoring mechanism which can publish data on clinical outcomes of all hospitals and perhaps also individual doctors. In such a database, if it's available to the common citizen, a citizen can choose his or her preferred provider or a doctor, so that this will boost the quality of care where our country is concerned.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. IMK Kochi campus cordially welcomes you all to the pre-Union Budget 2017 panel discussion. There is a small request. Those who are sitting in the back seat, kindly come forward. Feel yourself comfortable. I myself, Sumita Sudhagar, and Shambhu Shashikumar is here to host this evening. This is one of the prestigious annual event of IAMK Kochi campus, and we are glad that this tradition has continued for the third of the 4 years the campus has been in existence. In prior events, we had Dr. Subramanya Swamy, Professor Govind Rao, and Professor Pulepura Balakrishnan amongst other eminent speakers. And this year, New India Assurance, India's #1 general insurance company, is our platinum sponsor. We are happy to have EKK Infrastructure, ACC Cements, UST Global, Spaceston Builders, KSIDC, RIA Travels, Splinteroids, Somani PK Tiles as our gold and silver sponsors. Asianet News and the Economic Times are our media partners.
Thank you, Sumita. Hello. Welcome to IIM Kozhikode Kochi campus. As you all know, IIMK, the 5th IIM in the country, is creating unique academic space and inculcates a spirit of lifelong learning in the participants by integrating concepts with applications and values. We are happy that you are here with us. Without much ado, we would like to start the event with a silent prayer. We request you to please stand for the same. Thank you. I humbly request you to kindly switch off or keep the mobile phones in silent mode. Thank you. Now, may I invite our respected panelists who have accepted our invitation and come to discuss their opinion about the Union Budget. Shri Gajendra Haldia, IAS, former advisor, infrastructure and PPP to the Planning Commission. He was also chief advisor and head of the Center for Infrastructure and Regulation at the National Council for Applied Economic Research, New Delhi. Sir, please, you are welcome to the dais, sir.
I invite our next panelist, Professor Venkatesh Atreya, who is a reputed economist and advisor to Ms. M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation, Chennai. He is also an adjunct professor of Asian College of Journalism. He has been actively involved in the areas of gender, literacy and development as both planner and social activist. He worked as a faculty, fellow and visiting scholar in number of reputed institutions in India and abroad. We request you to come on the dais, sir, please.
Thank you, sir. Next, I invite Sri T.K. Arun, editor and opinion at the Economic Times. He started his career in journalism in 1992 at the Observer of Business and Politics, New Delhi. And then he worked as a technical advisor at the Kerala State Planning Board. His blog, Name as Cursor, I am sure many of you are the followers of it, appears on both the online editions of the Economic Times and the Times of India. We welcome you, sir.
Next, I would like to invite Sri Ramana Kumar, who is the founder of Overpax Legal, a corporate law firm. He is a chartered accountant and a lawyer enrolled in Madras High Court. He was also a consultant to an international law firm on the matters concerning of taxation, especially in indirect taxation. Apart from being a business advisor, he is also a teacher in the subjects of information technology and direct taxation. Sri Ramana Kumar is also an active photographer who takes classes on photography, travel and related subjects. Sir, please.
Thank you, sir. Finally, I invite our moderator, Professor Rudra Sen Sharma, who is a professor from the economics area in IIM Kozhikode. Professor Rudra has worked with the University of Hertfordshire as senior lecturer in finance. He did his postdoctoral research as Maxwell Fry Research Fellow in Finance at the University of Birmingham. He has also worked at IIM Lucknow and as an economist in the Department of Economic Analysis and Policy, RBI. We welcome you, sir.
Today's panel discussion, Pre-Union Budget 2017, is slated on the theme of India, an emerging economic powerhouse and the policies to boost competitiveness. This year's budget, as all of you know, is one of the most awaited and one in the recent times with a lot of debatable issues, namely demonetization, GST, Make in India, upcoming state elections, slowing world economy, announcements and introduction of multi-level social and economic welfare schemes. What is in store for various stakeholders from the budget? What are our expectations from it?
Yes, Sumita, you are absolutely right. That's why we focused on the themes like pioneering digital India through financial inclusion, reminiscing Chakravyuha, a market without exits, the center and state governments attaining financial nirvana, sanctification of the small, is demonetization a boon or bane, private-public partnership as a tool for sustainable growth.
Okay, now there is a small announcement, that is, there is a live Twitter option where you can post your queries which will be answered at the end of this session. Please note, while posting the question, hashtag the panelist name to whom you want to address. To answer all your queries and to provide us with the perspective about Union Budget 2017, today we are blessed with the presence of 5 subject experts. And after listening to them, interacting to them, I'm sure that by conclusion of this session, we would have more clarity about what Union Budget 2017 would store for us. Hope we will generate enough discussion to provide tangible suggestions to policy makers and for a better India.
Now, I would request Professor Rajesh Upadhyayulu, the chairperson of IMK Kochi campus, to formally welcome the dignitaries and the guests.
Good afternoon. On behalf of IIM Kozhikode and IMK Kochi campus, it's indeed a privilege to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished panel members, Sri Gajendra Haldiyaji, Professor Venkatesh Atraya, Sri T.K. Arun, and Mr. Ramana Kumar. I would like to thank them for kindly accepting to be a part of the third pre-union budget, a panel discussion event which is hosted by IMK Kochi campus. It's also indeed a pleasure to welcome delegates from the industry, sponsors to this event, friends and colleagues from other academic institutions, students from various business colleges, media personnel, participants from the hall, and those viewing through a live stream through other outlets to this event. Before I let Professor Rudra take over, as a chairperson of IMK Kochi campus, I would like to briefly introduce you to IIM Kozhikode and IMK Kochi campus in particular. IIM Kozhikode was established as the fifth oldest IIM in the country in the year 1996. We have recently commemorated 20 years of our journey at the 20th Foundation Day held last year. We feel that IMK as an institution has made significant strides since its inception in the field of management education by influencing industry thought leadership as well as policy thought leadership. This is done through a number of activities that we conduct at the institution. Amongst these activities, our primary activity is imparting education to a variety of stakeholders. Some of our programs include the postgraduate program in management, which is the 2-year residential program at the IMK Kozhikode campus, fellow program in management, which is the doctoral program of the institution. Then a number of short duration and long duration programs are offered to the private sector. And we also undertake research and consultancy. Due to the locational advantage of IIM Kozhikode, it was one of the first IIMs to get into the online management education through interactive distance learning platform in the year 2001. And in that platform, we do offer a 2-year executive postgraduate program in management for working executive on an online platform, and which is equivalent to an MBA and accredited by global bodies such as AMBA. As part of our further efforts to reach and engage with industry and other stakeholders, IMK Kochi campus was established in the year 2012. We do conduct the same 2-year executive postgraduate program for management for working executives at Kochi campus also. Beyond the EPGP program at the Kochi campus, we also do conduct a number of short duration and long duration programs which are called management development programs at this campus. We are happy to share that the first batch of EPGP 01 from IMK Kochi campus has graduated in April 2016. And the second batch has completed all requirements for graduation in April 2017. We are also happy to announce that there are now nearly 350 torchbearers of the Executive Postgraduate Program from IMK Kochi campus. We thank the industry, students and the community for all the support extended to us at Kochi campus. I would also like to place my special thanks to Infopark, Department of Information Technology and Kerala government for their support to the Kochi campus at IMK. In fact, I am also happy to inform that there are a number of people who have graduated from the institution has taken on bigger roles and also have gone into entrepreneurship themselves. As a corollary to that, IMK has recently launched an endeavor called as IMK Live, which is Laboratory for Innovation, Venturing and Entrepreneurship, which is an incubator to support enterprises within the state of Kerala and even outside the state. The applications are welcome from anybody and everyone, so one can visit imklive.org for more details. At Kochi campus, the participants, through their vibrancy, organizes a number of leadership seminars and talks. As part of the same, this pre-union budget panel discussion was conceptualized as an event to contribute significantly to identify and elaborate the key challenges and issues faced by the Indian economy. The event has taken significant and confident strides. I congratulate all the previous batches and especially the current batch of EPGP 04 and 03 for making this successful. However, while this event a number of events may identify and elaborate key issues for the union budget and the government to note, I do hope that the Indian Parliament would start functioning and would focus on issues rather than on people. I am sincerely looking forward to hearing from all the panelists. Once again, I would like to extend a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request Professor to stay back for a few minutes for the official inauguration of the session. I invite the dignitaries to light the lamp and to inaugurate the session formally.
That was really an auspicious moment. And now it's time for the session to begin. I invite Professor Rudra to initiate the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me get this sorted. Yeah, thank you. So, good afternoon to everyone. A warm welcome to all of you for this event, and thank you very much for coming here and attending what promises to be a very exciting, educative and productive occasion. I would like to begin, although I don't want to take much time and stand between you and the speakers, our very eminent speakers, but I would like to quickly express my gratitude and congratulations to the fantastic team at IIMK Kochi campus, the EPGP students and participants who have organized this. So, thank you for applauding their efforts. I also would like to congratulate Professor Rajesh Upadhyaya, the chairperson of the campus, and Professor Abhilash Nair and other faculty members who have supported the event so well. Thank you, of course, for inviting me to do this honor. And thank you to all the distinguished panelists for accepting our invitation and being here. This event is actually now very much on the Kochi and Kerala event calendar, something which people have started looking forward to. This is the only pre-budget event and the first one as a curtain raiser to the union budget. There are of course a lot of post-budget analysis that happens, but we would like to say we are the first that sets the ball rolling. So it receives good media coverage and people look forward to it. I think this is a very exciting year to have this discussion. 2016-17, a black swan year in many ways. So we have had recently demonetization scheme. We are hoping to have the GST very soon. So a lot of big bang changes, whether you like it or not, but these are significant transformation happening in the economy. Interestingly, 25 years back, there was another set of big bang events. So if you think of 1990, 1991, we had the balance of payments crisis followed by the economic reforms. 25 years before that, so 1966-67, there were some big bang changes. So there was a huge devaluation of the rupee of around more than 50% devaluation. There were some economic reforms that started in 1965-66. A little bit of industrial delicensing, some bit of subsidy rationalization, trade reforms. There was a drought. So the changes had started in 1965-66, which could be considered as one big bang year in India's economic history, and then 1991, and then 2016. So it seems that you can expect the next big bang reforms in 2040, so hopefully we'll have some peaceful years ahead. So changes seem to happen every 25 years. But anyway, that being the case, let me quickly come to the theme. So as the organizers of the event have very lucidly put together, the basic theme of the event is an economic powerhouse in the making, India at the crossroads. So we are at the crossroads of something very exciting, which we could either make or we could break. So we are standing at the cusp of something very transformative. We might join the League of Developed Nations very soon if we play our cards right, or we could miss a very historic opportunity which has been presented to us. And within that overarching theme, there are specific sub-themes. So there is one on financial inclusion. You have all heard of the JAM number trinity, the Jan Dhan account number, the Aadhaar number and the mobile number, which linked together, synced together, can help transform lives of those who are outside the banking system and bring about financial inclusion. So that's something very exciting that is happening. The second sub-theme is about the Chakravyuha economy. So Chakravyuha economy, a term coined in the economic survey last year, which basically means we are making it easy for businesses to enter, but not very easy for them to exit. So is that helpful? Will it not keep businesses constrained from growing fast? The third sub-theme is about the center and state governments. So GST, for instance, is one of the very key policies which will help increase tax revenues, bring about tax efficiency, bring about an era of center-state cooperation. And fourth theme is about the demonetization. So sanctification of the small. Is small currency beautiful and the big currency evil? So how is demonetization going to affect our lives and the economy? And the last theme is the PPP, private-public partnership, as a tool for sustainable growth. So there are extreme views about governments running companies vis-a-vis the private sector running companies. So can PPP be a middle path? Can it be the best of both worlds? So what has been the experience? Can it be one of the ways to move ahead? So these are the sub-themes. Let me introduce the format of the panel discussion. So I will request each speaker to deliver their opening remarks of 15 minutes each. And we are in Kerala, of course, the land of football. So you would enjoy watching me do this, which is act as the referee. And when there's 2 minutes left, I'm going to throw a yellow card. And when the time is over, I'm going to throw up a red card. It is all in good humor. So with due respect to the eminent panelists, this is my only role here. It's really time management. So I'll do my role sincerely. So the opening round is of 15 minutes each. and then we will have a second round of comments from each speaker in case they want to have a follow-up point or rebut or respond to some other speaker's points. So we'll have a second round of 5 minutes each. And then we will throw it up to questions. We will take audience questions and we will have an interactive session followed by a concluding round of remarks from each panelist. So with that, let me stop standing between you and our eminent speakers, and let me invite, first of all, Professor Venkatesh Atreya to please make his opening remarks. Thank you, sir.
I guess my clock starts now. First, let me thank the organizers for inviting me here, and let me thank our young friends for the wonderful hospitality that I have been a recipient of since yesterday. And though we have 15 minutes, I intend to spend a part of it on the expectations about the budget and a part of it on one of the most important events which has a bearing on the budget and its follow-up. Let me start with the budget. I think it's important to begin by recalling that whatever numbers you get in the budget are estimates. Invariably at the end of a year you get the revised estimates, and very often there's a good distance between the budget estimates and the revised estimates with respect to most outlays and other figures. Then of course you get the actuals 1 year later, by which time all of us have happily forgotten what the finance minister had said 2 years earlier. So it's important therefore to remember at all times that when you get the budget in your hands, the numbers aren't exactly sacrosanct. The numbers are tentative numbers. And they'll be even more tentative this year if the budget is presented on the... Why you can't cover me on this?
Because we are already centralized. Sorry for the disturbance. Time from my allocation, obviously. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm more comfortable, but I've been a teacher, so one is used to speaking from podiums. The point I want to make is that when you get the budget numbers, remember they are estimates. And if you're doing it at the end of January, they're even more guesstimates because you don't really have a lot of the figures of the economy in. You won't get the third quarter results in and so on. So whichever way the court rules, the earlier budget would certainly put a little more uncertainty on the numbers. I'm not getting into the politics of whether the budget should be delivered or not. The second thing I want to make clear is that the budget is only one of several policy instruments that the government has got. And the third point I want to make is that the budget is presented within a specific set of constraints because there is after all a certain distribution of assets in this country and therefore of economic power. And this translates into political power. So the influence on public policy of those who are economically powerful is far greater than those of those who are not economically powerful, notwithstanding the one man, one vote principle in our country, especially given that elections are also seriously influenced by money transactions. So I don't expect dramatic changes in the budget, although this government has acquired a reputation for shock and awe following demonetization. So these are basic pointers. So within the framework of these constraints, there is the other important constraint, which is that you are, unlike before 1991, you are now linked substantially to the world economy. So the global economy and the situation also impact on the decisions that the government makes vis-a-vis the budget. So these are factors to be kept in mind. Now it doesn't mean therefore that nothing can be done, obviously, because the reason we discuss it even before it is presented is also because the central government's budget accounts for about 14% of GDP. And therefore in a democracy you should discuss it. Whether you like it or not, you should discuss it. So I'm glad that this opportunity has come our way. Although at this point in time, we'll all be making guesses. So we don't know which way the final budget will come out. Having said that, let me just remind you that this is going to be the fourth budget of the present government. In the three budgets they have presented, there's been a certain pattern. One is that none of the budgets has given any significant stimulus to the economy by increased expenditure as a share of GDP. They've had some nominal increases in the budgetary estimates, and later on there's been some reduction in the
revised estimates. For example, in the last year's 15-16 budget, for example, the revised estimates of expenditure fell short of the budget estimates by a fairly large 1,13,000 crores. And these cuts were mostly in agriculture, rural development, education, health, and so on. So there is a pattern to the cuts as well. So this year also, one would like to see whether the government will take a different line and go in for a larger stimulus to the economy by increasing public expenditure. The constraint there, of course, is the obsession with the fiscal deficit, which for the uninitiated is basically the difference between all expenditure on the one hand, current plus capital, and the non-debt receipts on the other. And this mantra that fiscal deficit should be less than 3% of GDP has been around for a while, though it is often observed in the breach. And this is used as an argument for limiting government outlays on a number of things that you and I may feel desirable. Of course, in principle, a deficit need not do that because it's the difference between two terms. One could actually see resource mobilization as the way out. But their incentive issues are raised and taxation is said to be not desirable. So you end up with a regime for several years now where the deficit reduction is obtained mostly by expenditure reduction. These are serious implications for health, education, other outlays which currently are well below what was promised way back in the National Common Minimum Program of 2004-05 and after, where we had said that the combined expenditure of the Government of India and the states would be at least 6% for education, 2 to 3% for healthcare, and currently they still stand at somewhere between about 4-5% both together. But health is less than about 1.5% and education is hardly about 3.5% or 4%. Okay, so I don't expect a dramatic change. I would like to see something. One can talk about what is desirable and what is likely to happen. So what I would like to see is considerably stepped up outlays on infrastructure, given that there is badly needed anyway, and also because there will be a stimulus for the economy which has been impacted negatively by demonetization. Secondly, I'd like to see a step up in outlays on education and healthcare. Ideally, of course, some of it can be done through the states. I don't want an over-centralized process here because I think decentralization is very important and it often gets left out in our discussions on budgets. By the same token, if you want to achieve that without overshooting the deficit target, even though the deficit target may be irrational, suppose you're constrained not to overshoot it, then the only alternative is to go in for more effective resource mobilization. And there the question of taxes comes in. We have a tax system where if you take the Government of India and all the states together, 65% or so of the total tax revenue is indirect taxes, which fall unduly on the poor. There is a strong case for increasing direct tax revenue, although we've been moving in the opposite direction in the last 3-4 years. We have abolished the wealth tax, we have given a number of concessions in respect to direct taxes, and there's a promise to reduce corporate tax rate to 25% over a 5-year period. But simultaneously the survey, economic survey, and the government spokespersons often talk about removal of exemptions. The latter never happens. The former may happen, the latter doesn't happen. Successive budgets have seen a reduction in the ratio of direct taxes to the overall tax revenue. One example I can quote is last year, when the receipts actually fell, the revised estimates of the direct taxes fell short by about nearly 46 lakh crores over the budget estimates. But the indirect taxes increased over budget estimates by about 55,000 crores. So I think there's a case for rethinking the structure of taxation and moving towards a more transparent direct tax regime, including return of the wealth tax, if you ask me, if you can make proper administrative arrangements. That requires strengthening the tax administration, of course. Likewise, outlays have to be enhanced considerably. Last year, there was a lot of jugglery in the budgets as well, as most of us are aware. And last year there was a jugglery about the agriculture budget where the increase shown was really the bank interest payment being subvention for that was shown as part of the agriculture budget. So I think I've said enough on the fiscal policy framework. I would like to see more direct taxes without harassing the small taxpayer. This is possible if you strengthen the tax administration, have a transparent regime, unlike what's happening right now. Now, we will spend a few minutes. I have about 5 minutes, perhaps? Okay. I have 9 minutes? Oh, wonderful. So I have more time. Okay, in which case I can actually talk a little bit more about the overall budget, which is, I think, if you look at the numbers over the years, the total expenditure as a share of GDP has not been rising. And in a system of economic growth driven by profits, essentially, an increasing share of profits in national income, and if profits are typically taxed at a higher rate, you would expect a rise in tax revenue to GDP. This is not happening. And one of the reasons, obviously, is a lot of exemptions. And we have some estimates of what these exemptions mean. We have the economic survey talking about it. We have the, if you go to the indiabudget.nic.in site, if you look at revenue foregone, you'll find a lot of figures there. But one of the important things you find in that document, as part of the budget papers, is also the effective tax rate of corporates. And that's around 21% for a fairly large sample. This is important because in a recent, some time ago, Raghuram Rajan was interviewed about demonetization. The expression used was that he clarified that he's talking about withdrawal of high value notes. This was before the Government of India action. And the point he was making was that in India, the tax rates are reasonable. And there's no reason why the rich cannot pay the taxes, because here the tax rate is around 33% if you include surcharge. US has much higher tax rates for corporates, so does Europe. So what's the problem? So that would be the route to increase resource mobilization and elimination of black money rather than the demonetization route. Also, some people could argue, of course, that, if we can reduce tax rates to zero, then you abolish black money by definition. After all, black money is money on which taxes are not paid, right? So if there are no taxes to be paid, there's no black money. This is the kind of argument that some people have been making. I don't obviously buy that argument. So what I would like to spend the next few minutes of my presentation is in talking about demonetization as a fairly poor strategy. There are several other themes mentioned here on which I'm not getting in a big way. GST, for example. These are important and complex issues involving center-state relations. And I think that in agreeing to GST, the states are giving up certain sovereign fiscal space they had earlier. These are serious implications. Likewise, on some of the other themes about PPP, our colleague is going to talk about it. There again, my position always has been that PPP has been marred by on-the-ground experience of being essentially partnership for private profit rather than public-private partnership. Likewise, on this question of the fiscal regime and so on, I've said whatever I want to say. If you look at the demonetization exercise in this context and its specific implications for the budget, the demonetization exercise has pushed the economy into a serious contraction. The recession is already there. Significant evidence is there. All India Manufacturing Organization has given you the figures. Others have talked about it. The impact on the informal economy has been quite severe. And in turn, this has had implications for the formal economy. And people don't expect this recovery to begin until well into the 2017-18 year. I mean, the media can sometimes be misleading. You have a headline saying World Bank, supports government estimate of growth. No, it doesn't. In fact, they've been saying that it will be 7.1%, more likely 6.8 if you take demonetization into account. So I'm not really too worried about what the World Bank says. I expect that the rate of growth this year would be significantly lower because of the recessionary impact of demonetization. Therefore, one would expect the government, therefore, to spend more. How they do it, we'll have to wait and see. But whatever was announced in the Prime Minister's speech, that's really not budget. I mean, if you make a statement that banks are expected to lend X amount, that is a statement of interest. It doesn't form part of the budget. So I think it's important to separate statements made in the budget about how much money will be given this year by banks, which is a matter for them to make a decision on, and actual budget-related expenditures and revenue. So one must make a distinction. I think that basically government has not yet assessed the negative impact of demonetization carefully, and it would need to do that in order to arrive at the size of the stimulus that would be required. I would certainly expect that the government, if it wants to recover lost ground, should substantially enhance its outlays and try to finance it by innovative mechanisms of resource mobilization. But even if the deficit does increase a bit, I don't think it's the end of the world. One of the reasons why you get so worried about fiscal deficits is because you're tied to the world economy through relatively unregulated capital flows. And so the point is to address that issue as well and not just be caught up in this frame of the FRBM Act. I think Mr. Jaitley had said something to that effect some time back, that you should average it over a cycle and all that. Whether they'll do it, we don't know. But I think, therefore, the demonetization has been cruel to the bulk of our population. Not only have there been several deaths, over 100, and it's ethically atrocious to call that inconvenience. These are directly related to people lining up in queues to take their own money out of the banks. There has been substantial negative impact on daily wage earners, on small players in the informal economy, on agriculture dramatically in the north, where the second crop is going to be seriously affected, because the first crop, for those who had sold their produce, they had old money. For those who had not sold it, the buyers had old money. So this couldn't be done, and the whole crop cycle has been affected. And in the south, there has been severe drought, both with northeast and the southwest. So, you're facing a major agrarian crisis this year across the country. So I would expect agricultural outlays to be enhanced substantially, and the issue of farmer suicides addressed seriously, both by the center and by the states. But in the budget, I don't know whether we can expect big initiatives of the kind. I think we do need to get away from the mindset of, we can't afford to have deficits and so on, and look at the needs of the people on the ground. I think the mechanisms for transferring these monies are, of course, something we can debate. But I think the fact that the government of India has to give a substantial stimulus to the economy cannot be contested. The fact also that after several years of increase in indirect taxes and lowering of direct taxes, there needs to be some reversal with a greater emphasis on direct taxes and mechanisms for effective collection of those taxes. Indirect taxes are quite serious, and GST will bring much more of that into the system. So I think it's important that the fiscal policy be reviewed and we move in the direction of greater direct taxation, which can be economically more justified and socially more justified. Whether all this will happen, we don't know. But my own suspicion from past experience is that there will be a lot of rhetoric in the budget, but the actual outlays would often be quite different from what the rhetoric would lead you to expect. Ultimately, what the government does or does not do has to be challenged by building up popular support for alternate policies, and we are a long way from doing that. But I think the media can play a role by having enlightened public discussions on these things rather than gently towing the government line. That's an important lacuna in our media. I hope that it gets addressed in the coming days. So with these words, I basically would say that the coming budget may have a lot of rhetoric, but I'm not very confident that it will have very concrete action, in particular given the devastation caused by demonetization. Sectors that need the support the most, small and medium industry, daily wage earners, the informal economy as a whole, and agriculture. These must receive priority, and so must infrastructure. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. On that note, I will conclude my first round of argument.
Thank you very much, sir. So you were just 5 seconds away from giving me an opportunity to flash the red card, so I did not get that opportunity. But at the risk of oversimplification, I think it would be fair to say that you are in favor of or you are against cutting off deficit through expenditure reduction. You would rather have revenues going up through increasing tax revenues, especially direct tax revenues. And secondly, of course, you made the very important point how demonetization has severely affected the economy, and those costs are something we are still, we will be suffering for quite some time. So we'll come back to these themes later. So thank you very much for your observations. May I now invite Mr. T.K. Arun for your opening remarks?
Let me begin with some very basic first principles observation of the budget. Why do we bother about the budget? Why are we concerned? It imposes taxes on us, which we have to pay, which takes away from our income, so we are concerned, right? Secondly, it spends on us. It spends on protecting us, our borders, internal security, on providing infrastructure, on things that will help you get educated, on things that will hopefully get you treated if you fall ill. It spends on vital social services. So the overall size of the budget, so these are the reasons why we bother about it. So how large the budget is in relation to the total size of the economy matters. In 1990, before the economic reforms began, the Indian budget of the central government as a proportion of GDP was 17%. Last year, not in 2016, 2015, the budget presented by Arun Jaitley projected expenditure that is 12% of GDP, which is the lowest in recent memory. So as a proportion of GDP, the government has been shrinking. To put this in perspective, many people think it's a great thing. A small government is good. Minimum government, maximum governance. These slogans you have heard. Take any successful market economy and take a guess what the size of the government is. Any idea what the size of the government is in, say, France? 51%. Great Britain, after a series of efforts by the conservative government to shrink the size of the government, is 40%. The United States, the paragon of market economy. Any idea what the size of the government is? It is 38%. In India, central and states combined, we manage around 27% of GDP. This expenditure is sustained by taxes to the tune of 16.5% of GDP, out of which slightly less than 11% comes from the center. The rest is collected by the states. The majority of taxes collected by the center today come from direct taxes. Now, you heard these terms, direct taxes, indirect taxes, probably not fully understood what these are. At least many of you, I'm sure, don't really understand why they are called direct and indirect. When you levy a direct tax on someone, the person on whom it is levied bears that tax. You cannot shift it to somebody else. When you levy an indirect tax, the person on whom that tax is levied manages to shift it to somebody else. Sales tax. Ultimately, the consumer bears it. It is levied on the shopkeeper. He pays the tax. Excise duty. The manufacturer pays it. But it's part of the price of the product that we pay as consumers. So it's shifted. So that is an indirect tax. When a rickshaw puller buys a box of matches, he pays the excise duty and the sales tax on that box of matches. When Mukesh Ambani buys a box of matches, he pays exactly the same amount of tax on that box of matches. So when the rate of tax is the same, or the amount of tax paid is the same on a product, regardless of the size of the income of the buyer, that is less progressive than in income tax, whose rate is higher on a person with a high income and lower on a person with a low income, or nil on people with very low income, right? So that's what direct taxes are considered to be progressive. So economic reforms have actually made taxes more progressive. When I began journalism in the early 90s, 80% of the government's revenues, central government's revenues, used to come from indirect taxes. Today, around 40% of the central government's revenues come from indirect taxes. More than 60% actually come from direct taxes, which is a good thing. It's an improvement brought about by economic reform. So that way, the economic reforms have been progressive in their overall level of taxation. But this is not the only reason why we worry about the budget. There is this issue of the fiscal deficit. Now, what is the fiscal? It is the borrowings by the government. Now, where do they borrow from? They borrow from the savings of the non-government sector. Households, private corporate, whatever is non-government. If the non-government sector has enough savings to spare after meeting their own ex-ante investment plans, there is no issue. Then there is no tension. However, suppose the private sector, non-government sector has its own investment plans for which requires a sizable section of its own savings, and the government tries to borrow more than what is left to spare after meeting the non-government sector's own investment plans, then there is greater demand in the economy than the goods and services are being produced. This leads to inflation and a wider current account deficit. So this creates macroeconomic instability. That is why the fiscal deficit is watched keenly by all economic observers. Is the government creating macroeconomic instability or not? But there is no sanctity to a particular number of the fiscal deficit. The 3% is a rule of thumb. in a year when the private sector is not investing, as is the case in India this year, has been the case in India the last 2 years, if the government borrows more from the private sector savings, there is no issue, because the private sector doesn't want to invest anything on its own. It might actually crowd in investment if the government spends and creates demand for the produce of private sector. However, we live in a globalized world, to which Professor Atreya referred. In this globalized world, the source of macroeconomic instability is not just excess demand, it's also financial stability. All of us have lived through the 2008 global financial crisis. It was a financial crisis. What happened was that financial stability of economies in the US and North Atlantic and Europe collapsed. Today, our stock markets are open to large amounts of foreign investment. We have a large amount of foreign direct investment in the economy. Indian companies have invested abroad. Indian companies have borrowed heavily from foreign banks, foreign lenders, foreign savers. We are vulnerable to changes in the exchange rate. It used to be considered that if a country's exchange rate went down, depreciated, and that is favorable for exports, and therefore the net impact on economic growth will be positive. Now economic wisdom has gone beyond this traditional assumption and actually investigated what is the impact in the case of a country with a large exposure to foreign loans. So recently at the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, 2 economists, one of whom happens to be an Indian, did a paper which shows that for an economy with a large exposure to foreign borrowings or foreign investment, the depreciation might result in actually a dip in economic growth. The correlation is positive. If the economy, the exchange rate strengthens, your economy might actually grow. Because when a currency strengthens, the debt repayment obligation of all your foreign borrowers, the foreign exchange borrowers, comes down. That effect might actually countervail the export boosting effect of a stronger, of a lower exchange rate. So we live in a world which is a little more complicated than what it used to be. And we have to worry about financial instability. One major component of financial instability is, of course, how much the government borrows. The other is the banking system. And our banking system is right now in a mess. The government of the central bank of the Reserve Bank of India says stress assets as a proportion of total assets is now 12.5% of GDP. We were discussing, and Mr. Haldia was saying, this probably is an understatement. They are not fully recognizing the extent of bad loans on the books. And the extent of bad loans might be even more. Which is one reason why banks don't lend. There is a measure that economists use to see how strong an economy is, its growth prospects are. This is the investment rate. What is the proportion of gross fixed capital formation as a proportion of GDP? Investment as a proportion of GDP. Today it is 26.5%, which is the lowest number since 2004-05. During the peak in 2007-08, it had reached 38%. It has fallen 12 percentage points. And unless you step up investment, you cannot grow. So, as Professor Atreya said, the government must step up public investment. Today, the private sector is not investing. And demonetization will actually further discourage investment. Sales of everything has come to a halt. Two-wheeler sales are down, car sales are down, appliance sales are down 38%. If that is the case, why would the producers of cars or two-wheelers or tractors or appliances invest in additional capacity? They have stopped orders from their suppliers. The suppliers in turn have stopped production. So there is no need for fresh capacity. Loan growth, the credit demand is at an all-time low in this economy. that growth will actually falter further and taper down. So banks cannot lend further even if they have burdened with an oversupply of deposits which they never wanted. Even if interest rates are brought down, the demand for credit is non-existent. When banks are so fragile and there is a sudden run on the exchange rate because Trump says something in the US and the dollar reacts and the rupee depreciates massively, it will create a problem for all those exposures in foreign exchange, and it will make our economy financially more fragile than we have imagined. And this is something that the budget and policy has to address. And it has to address it by strengthening the banks, recapitalizing the banks, by notifying the rules for the bankruptcy code that has been put in place, and ensuring that bad loans are taken off the bank's books. You have to clean up the banking system, liquidate the bad assets, and redeploy those assets in the economy. Let's think about the Chakravyuha. Chakravyuha actually is not a place that doesn't exist. Chakravyuha, you can enter and you can exit, but you need to know how. Now, in the Mahabharata, Abhimanyu knew how to enter, but he didn't know how to get out. But the point is, if you create an enterprise and the enterprise fails, then you must be able to liquidate the enterprise and redeploy the assets that are locked up in the enterprise elsewhere in the system. If it's land, that land must be sold. If it is plant and machinery, somebody will buy it and use it to either make scrap or to produce whatever has been produced by this failed enterprise in a more optimal fashion. People must be redeployed in more productive ways instead of waiting to get a wage which they'll never get and committing suicide. Liquidating failed companies is absolutely essential for the system to function. And we didn't have a mechanism to do this till this bankruptcy law was passed. Now the law must be activated by issuing rules and bringing in the resolution professionals. That is another challenge. It is not just a budget, it is actually a policy and getting going. Now, so in the initial round, this is what I basically wanted to highlight, that our economy today is fragile, and to make it stronger, the government needs to play a very positive role. The only silver lining right now is that the world economy is once again starting to grow. The worst part of the post-financial crisis slowdown seems to be over. The US economy has been growing and the growth is sustained. For the first time, the European Union across the Eurozone turned in a positive rate of growth. Now, while the emerging markets that are dependent on the commodity cycles are yet to revive, the recent housing boom in China has created demand for steel, which in turn has created demand for iron ore and coal, which is reflected in the also oil prices going up. Some sign of life in the commodity exporting nations as well. It is not good news for us who import oil, but for the global economy, there is some good news, which in turn will feed through as larger export orders for India as well. So this is the only positive side. But we have shown remarkable capacity for shooting ourselves in the foot, as with demonetization, which has accentuated the fragility. And unless we take extreme measures to strengthen our banking system and its regulation, we will be in deep trouble. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arun. Our panelists are very disciplined today, so you were 2 seconds short of me getting an opportunity to flash the red card. So, but thank you very much. You covered a lot of issues. You threw up a lot of challenges to the economy, but there was also a hopeful note that the world economy is growing. So hopefully with that exports pick up, then perhaps one of the initial problems you flagged, which is our vulnerability because of large foreign borrowings, I wonder whether that would be reduced if we are able to have a current account surplus instead of a deficit. But maybe I'll pick your brains on that a little later. Certainly, Insolvency Act, again, probably a hopeful note that if that is strictly implemented, that might bring down the non-performing assets in banking system and improve the investment rate, which is historically low, as you pointed out. So thank you once again. Let me move to our third panelist, Mr. Ramana Kumar, and invite you for your views, sir.
Thank you, Rudra. Friends, this is really an historic budget for a few more reasons than what Professor Rudra had explained. It's an historic budget because for the first time it is going to be ahead of the scheduled date in March and going to be held in the first week of February. The government has a feeling that it will have that much more time to implement it, but my feeling is that unless you pass the budget in the parliament, you will not be able to implement it. It will still be in the bill stage. The other reason for which it is an historic budget is that there is no rail budget, and the rail budget will also be embedded into the union budget. The third one, on a lighter vein, is that we have already seen a trailer of the budget on the 31st of December. So now we wait for the main picture. But what the budget expectations are from a professional who has, actually handled the issues in the direct and indirect taxes, I would like to view that from that angle rather than a macroeconomic where my learned experts have touched upon. First is whether a demonetization is good or bad. We have to live with it. The open heart surgery has been performed, whether not taking the second opinion or doing a faulty operation, but it has been done. Now the patient has to recoup. The patient has to stand on the legs. So this budget is one of the important avenues by which the pains of demonetization can be soothed. Budgets in India have been historically utilized, especially the Income Tax Act in India has been historically utilized to administer many other acts. Many other acts and social schemes have been administered through the budgets. So one of them would also be, now we have to include the pains of demonetization also to be addressed by the budget. One of the first things we can do is, as rightly said, the small traders, SMEs have all been affected. So from an income tax point of view, reduce the tax rate from 8% to 6% would be an optimal one under section 44 AD, and increase the turnover bracket from 1 crore to say 3 crores or 5 crores as the government may deem fit. It is one of the important requests from the struggling SMEs and small traders to carry on in life and improve their situation. The other one is the lowering of the income tax rate. Historically, it is observed that when there is low tax rate, the compliance is more. There is actually more revenue by lowering that tax rates. The finance minister, of course, in the floor of parliament, has given a promise that the rates would come down to 25%. We are in a global market. The other global rates, Singapore is 17.5%, Hong Kong is 15%, China is 25%, UK is 20%, now going to be 16%, and the US has a rate of 35%, which is going to be reduced. Compared to all the jurisdictions, India, if you compare with all the jurisdictions, India has a slightly higher tax rate. So that needs to be reduced. Manufacturing sector, as rightly pointed out, is at a very low situation now. Car companies offering tons of discounts. There will be a situation where you buy a car and the car company will pay you 10,000 rupees. That is the situation the car companies are facing. Not only car companies, all manufacturing sectors. So there has to be an impetus to improve manufacture, a domestic manufacture in India. You have Make in India, Digital India, all that will work only if the manufacture sector thrives. It is the agriculture and manufacture which are the two pillars of any economy, especially the Indian economy. So there has to be impetus to improve the manufacturing sector. In that, there is one section in the Income Tax Act. It's called 80JJAA. 80JJAA says if you increase the number of workmen in your factory to a certain extent, but of course, as usual, has a long list of conditions to comply, you will get X amount of deduction. That has to be simplified. It is one of the most underutilized section in the Income Tax Act. That has to be made effective, and 80JJAA has to be, some impetus to give so that the jobs are created, more jobs are, in the offering, and at least for the sake of incentives, the companies would start employing more people. Secondly, research and development. Over the years, even as an international consultant, I've experienced that there is no transfer of technology into India. The foreign companies come into India, manufacture with those technologies, either in an SEZ situation or in a 10A situation, export zone situation, and either it is re-exported back or the finished product is sold in India. Many situations, the products are brought into India with a knockdown condition, assembled with the screwdriver technology, and it is sold or exported back. There is no impetus for research in India. All research happens outside. There is no transfer of technology per se. So research has to be developed, research has to be improved in India, for which Income Tax Act is is a very good way by giving a weighted deduction for research. Minimum alternative tax, the corporates have always been complaining on minimum alternative tax, and the present government, when in opposition, had actually opposed the MAT. Now it is time for the government to act on its words, if possible, to remove or do away with MAT. All these are budget expectations of a businessman, of a professional, of the common man, as I would see it. There is a clamor to increase the exemption limit. I would not go on that premise at all. Now the exemption limit is 2.5 lakhs for individuals. Retain the 2.5 lakhs as individual, for an individual. There is a section called 87A, which is a rebate of up to 10,000 rupees offered to any individual, HUF, etc., for claiming that rebate. That rebate of 10,000 rupees is equivalent to a base rate of 3 lakhs, because taking 10%, it comes to about 3.5 lakhs. Everybody has been complaining that the number of income tax assessees in India are low. If the basic exemption limit is increased, say to 3.5 or 4 lakhs, there will be that number of assessees out of the income tax net. Whether that's good or bad is a debate in its own account. But if you want to have the base, you cannot increase the exemption, the basic exemption, but we need to go by the 87A route by increasing the rebate. So, an assessee of say even 4 lakhs or 5 lakhs would file a return of income, but he would not have to pay any tax because he can claim the exemption through that 87A rebate. That is one point which I expect the budget to address. Not to remove a significant chunk of taxpayers or assessees from out of the tax net. Now having said that, for businessmen they have a lot of exemptions. They can play around with the tax and try to do something. But for a salaried employee, everything is crystallized. The salaried employee would not be able to take any benefit of any other section except the savings section, that too on expenditure only. Some time back, there was a standard deduction for the salaried employees as well. So that may be introduced, and one of the measures to smoothen the effects of demonetization also would be to give a standard deduction, bring back the standard deduction into the Income Tax Act for the salaried employees, which would be better. Tax resolution is at the lowest ebb. There is absolutely no certainty as to what would happen. There is absolutely, for frivolous issues, cases are being filed by the department, even though there are circulars to say that it must not border to harassment. There are many cases which borders to harassment, but it can be taken in either way. So tax resolution was introduced into India with a dispute resolution scheme last year. It was not a great success, I would say, actually, for the reason that it had a lot of conditions to be complied with, and even if one condition was not complied with, the whole thing fell flat. Now a new dispute resolution can be introduced in a way that the number of existing cases can be reduced in a way that, the government also gives in something and also the assessee gives in something. A via media reconciliation mode would be much better. And the tax resolution also would go on to ease, make doing the business in India a much more easier option than anything. The GAR, the General Anti-Avoidance Agreement, the provisions of GAR would be applicable on all the citizens from the 1st of April. With the effect of demonetization, almost anything can be, any amount of, any small non-compliance or deviation also can be brought into the bracket of GAR, General Anti-Avoidance Provisions. So that has to be carefully monitored, at least for the current year, to say that from 3 lakhs, which is 3 crores, which is a threshold limit, increase the threshold limit to at least, say, 7.5 or 8 crores, so that the small investors, the small businessmen, SMEs, and small-scale undertakings are out of the GAR provisions. I would actually like to see GAR provisions out, because there are a lot of other methods by which it can be brought in. In 2014, the Black Money Act, the Foreign Black Money Act, was introduced with great favor, and the government spent a lot of efforts to ask people to file their returns. Ultimately, only 600 people filed their returns, and the total collection from the window given under the Black Money Act was around 3,500 crores or something like that. And the government said action would be taken against all the hoarders, against all the against all the people who have black money slashed abroad. Nothing has happened up till now for 2 years. That has to be speeded up, and the budget has to show some amount of inclination towards actually bringing the so-called black money, if it is there outside of India, into the country. The existing Black Money Act, at least for the foreign assets, would not serve the purpose as it is designed in the present form. Capital markets are doing fine. There has been reports in the press that in fact the Prime Minister also went on records to say that, why not tax the profit from capital market? Please don't tinker. At least one thing in the Income Tax Act which is going fine is the exemption with respect to the shares held for more than 365 days with respect to equity. That would give a great boost to the capital market and at least the investment into the capital markets. Gold demonetization. The government has brought into the gold demonetization. Some amount of relief on the gold demonetization is actually expected to make it more practical. India is a land of gold. Sone ki chidiya hai India. So there is gold in every household. Even lower middle class have got some amount of gold. If you want people to give the gold to the government and take it in form of the bonds, there has to be trust built. Enormous amount of trust has to be built by the government for the people to park with their loans. In fact, an anecdote is brought about on the South Korean market, where people gave the money during the 1997 or sometime crisis, the gold for the country to use it for infrastructure. That amount of trust has to be brought in. Under the indirect tax, as per the expectation of budget, I don't want any tinkering to be done. As of now, there is enough and more confusion on GST, whether it will be implemented, whether it will come about. I think from the from the drawing boards of economists and bureaucrats, it is now into the arena of politicians, where everybody wants to grab the pie in the GST cake, which is actually not possible. And until there is a consensus and the GST is introduced, kindly do not tinker with any of the indirect tax proposals and let it be at the present rate. And one more thing which I want to remove is, I want the cess and the surcharge to be removed. The cess and surcharge was introduced for the first time, if I may be corrected, during the 1971 war, when India was fighting both in the eastern and western fronts. Surcharge is usually an extraordinary situation only. The surcharge is introduced. The finance minister about 10 years back first introduced a primary education surcharge. Afterwards, it became a secondary education surcharge. And the child graduated, then it became a college surcharge. I don't know, next might be a marriage surcharge also. So, there has to be a certainty. Why the Krishi Kalyan says, we pay 15% of service tax. From the service tax, let the government apportion 0.5% to Krishi Kalyan cess. If the assessee doesn't fill the application in a way that Krishi Kalyan says 0.5% is not done, he is served with a notice. Such type of compliance irritations have to be removed by the government. And one important thing is you peg the tax rate at 30%, but please don't have the surcharge, cess, etc., and in various one. I was a goalkeeper for my school football team. So for me, generally, the yellow card doesn't apply. Thanks a lot for a very patient hearing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for your very concrete set of do's and don'ts for the government. So I think you spoke about specific do's such as reduce tax rates, increase exemptions, direct taxes, of course, for especially small businesses, small traders, encourage R&D through tax incentives. There were specific don'ts, so don't tinker with indirect taxes, don't remove exemptions because that will reduce the tax base, and of course this cess regime which is there, which is just another way to say that we are not raising taxes, but we have put a cess. I mean, it's the same thing. Why don't you just be bold enough and increase tax rates? But you don't want to increase taxes, you want to impose cess in the name of anything and everything. So that is something you would like to be removed. So thank you for your views. And now finally let me move to Mr. Gajendra Haldia for your opening remarks, sir.
Well, thank you very much. A lot has been said by the learned panelists here, so there is not too much to add. But let me start from the macro perspective, which is what really worries us. What are the growth prospects? Are we going to continue our growth trajectory? Is it going to decline sharply? What is going to happen next year and the year thereafter? Well, I think the Indian economy is firmly on a very sound, robust and resilient path that we have seen for the last decade or more, despite global disturbances of a major order. 2006-07, the housing subprime US and the turmoil that followed all over the world, we still managed to move along. One reason for that is that, to use the facts put out by Mr. Arun very succinctly, that the government expenditure as a proportion of GDP declined from 17% to 12% over a period of 25 years. That's right. I would like to put the same facts in another way. This has happened because private sector activity has grown very rapidly. And even though government expenditure has risen quite rapidly, because of growth in tax revenues, because of growth in borrowings and other activity, they still shrank in proportion to the overall economy because the growth of private sector has been very encouraging in the last 20-25 years. And that continues to be the case. So, people of India, entrepreneurs like you, managers like you, the entire economy is moving on, and I do not see in the near future any major destabilization to occur. So the growth prospects will by and large remain robust, and the maximum that the government can do is to work in a band of 1 or 2%, which actually is quite large. So 7% may come down to 7.5% may come down to 7%, 6.5%, maybe 6%, or go up to 8% if the government does the right things across the board. But that's about the band. In that scenario, the role of the budget is far less significant than it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. So this traditional debate and excitement about the budget needs to actually be toned down. I don't see the budget making a great difference to our lives anymore. It might offer a day's excitement if my tax rate goes down a bit, or some tax gets reduced, or something happens here or there, but it does not alter our expectations very significantly. And if they have to be altered, then there are much more substantive decisions that need to be taken. For example, Mr. Arun pointed out the sharp decline in capital formation from 36% to 24%. Yeah. It's a very sharp decline. That has happened for a variety of reasons. Some of them I might touch. Those kind of imbalances or declines cannot be really addressed by the budget, but they have to be addressed by sustained government policy and government policy implementation, which actually doesn't come too much from the budget. Budget is merely a statement of intent. So, I think, generally speaking, the economy is resilient. We don't have to worry too much about a sharp decline in growth. The GST is likely to happen. That will be a major economic reform after a long period. And we have been trying to get GST for the last almost a decade, and we hope that within a year it will happen. That will improve matters quite a bit and improve the economic growth and the overall performance of the economy gradually, but in a very sustained manner. So that's my broad understanding of the economic situation. So far as the budget is concerned, I think it is a budget which faces very serious challenges. And I'm not sure how the government is going to address them, because the space available is rather limited. So there may be some, tweaking here or there and some populist announcement, but how these challenges will be overcome is something that remains to be seen. So the finance minister has a very, very tough task ahead of him. One immediate problem that has occurred is demonetization. Enough has been said, I don't need to add more. A lot has been written. I think there is general agreement that it has caused a huge amount of disruption. In the short run, there is a huge cost to be paid. In the medium and long term, whether that will be recovered or not remains to be seen. So that can be debated at some other point, but there is no doubt about the fact that there is a short-term cost and short-term disruption which has occurred and which needs to be set right. I do not think the budget can do much about setting it right. But what may happen is that, as was mentioned by my learned panelist here, that the government may have to soothe, as you said, the ruffled feathers will have to be addressed. And in that process, I won't be surprised if some populist announcements are made to win back many alienated people, many irritated people. You may feel happy for a while when you hear of that in the budget, but that will come at a cost. The fiscal deficit will rise, and the consequent macroeconomic balance may be impacted. So that's one challenge. How do you address the alienation or the disruption which has been caused by demonetization, and what will the budget do? How will it smoothen the ruffled feathers? That's one big challenge that the finance minister will face. The other point about economic growth, and Mr. Arun mentioned about it, is the huge problem of NPAs and the banking system not lending anymore. There is a sharp deceleration in the growth of credit. Banks are very hesitant. They were very reckless in lending. A lot of crony capitalism over the last decade, and the birds have come home to roost, and the NPAs are rising. Government keeps saying for the last 1 year that the worst is over, and everywhere I like to say that the worst is yet to come. So in banking, worst is yet to come. And if banks are not going to lend, then capital formation is not going to take place at the desired pace. So growth will be impacted. I do not see how the budget will address it. One important thing the budget can do is to increase the capitalization of banks, recapitalize the banks. But that requires very massive resources, which the government doesn't have at this point of time. So I do not see a major improvement in the banking system, and therefore the lending and the credit operations, and therefore the acceleration of capital formation. So it's going to be a very tightrope walk, and I don't see any great movement. I don't see governments having some tricks in its hat which will throw out to change this scenario significantly. There may be minor tinkering or tweaking here and there. So that's another very big challenge about the banking system as a whole, about the growth of credit, about the growth of investment, about the growth of employment and incomes as a result of all this. So that's another challenge. Now in this entire exercise, infrastructure financing has taken a huge beating. When we began this exercise of increasing infrastructure investment in 2004-2005, we noted that in India, of the total expenditure investment on infrastructure as a proportion of GDP, we were spending about 5%. The rapidly growing East Asian economies in China were investing 9 to 10%. So we are actually creating or increasing the infrastructure gap, infrastructure deficit. Therefore, there was a huge need to pump in more money in infrastructure. So government set about taking very, very focused and targeted measures. And what that did was that, during the 10th plan, which was 2002 to 2007, the total investment at constant 2007-8 prices was about 9 lakh crores in infrastructure. And in the 11th plan, that is 2007 to 2012, 9 lakhs at constant prices jumped to 19 lakhs. Such a sharp rise. And private investment jumped from 2 lakh crores to 7 lakh crores. More than 3.5 times. That is what led to the 34% gross capital formation, contributed to that. So, between 2008 and 2012, according to World Bank data, India had the highest PPP investment in the world. We were at number 1 position. But 12, 13, 14, and now we have seen a steady decline, and hence the low investment numbers. Many policies went wrong, many implementation arrangements went wrong. There was hijacking, there was crony capitalism, there was corruption, there were all kinds of failures in the banking system. The short point is that infrastructure investment has gone down. Private investment has dried up. Foreign investors don't get attracted anymore. They don't want to invest in power, they don't want to invest in roads, not substantially in any case. So infrastructure creation has decelerated. And that's going to create problems 2 or 3 years later. In the last 2-3 years, I haven't heard of a single new power station being initiated. So the past ones are continuing, and you will get the benefit of them maybe this year, next year, 2-3 years later. The demand that is going to come up later will not be satisfied because we are not creating anything now. The government is unable to attract investment in infrastructure at this point of time, and what is therefore happening is that the finance minister is allocating more and more budgetary resources, public resources, for public spending on infrastructure. When that happens, you curtail investment on health, you curtail investment on education, other social sectors, and that does not have a very healthy impact on the economy as a whole. So there is a huge amount of pressure on the finance minister to increase public spending on infrastructure, which he is likely to do. But that means less spending on rural development, less spending on rural employment, less spending on health, less spending on education. That's not particularly good news. So this is another major challenge that the finance minister faces. So infrastructure is not in good shape, and investment projections are not creating any hope. Then you come to some flagship initiatives. As programs, as concepts, as slogans, they're very good. Make in India. But we would want to see a far more detailed and disaggregated action plan that actually makes it happen. So, who here would object to Make in India, and who would not love to support it? We all would. But it has to be implemented on the ground, and we need the finance minister and the prime minister and the industry minister and the cabinet to list out actions and time frames by which it will actually be on the ground before us. So that's another big challenge. And then they are talking of doubling agriculture income, but I don't have a ghost of an idea how that can happen, because accelerating agriculture growth is far more challenging than accelerating growth in services or industry or infrastructure or what have you. And to cap it all, we have elections in 5 states. So the government will be under huge amount of pressure to declare populist measures, election commission notwithstanding. And that means another round of goodies. Well, some goodies came on the 31st December when the Prime Minister spoke about giving various, concessions. And more have to come as we go along. Because elections are, democracy is all about winning elections. If you're not winning elections, then nothing else matters. So that is another challenge that the budget has to address. So far as PPP is concerned, there was a huge amount of framework, and there was a huge amount of policy making that happened between 2005 and 2013-14. And as I told you, that led India to the top position in the world. But focus has been lost. The institutional arrangements, starting from the Committee on Infrastructure headed by no less than the Prime Minister, and the Secretariat for PPP and infrastructure set up specifically in the Planning Commission, and focused, time-bound, specific actions were being announced and taken. That focus has been lost. As a result, we are seeing very slow inflow or hardly any inflow of private investment in the PPP mode. You would say, well, right next to you in Vizhinjam, a new port is coming up, 8,000 crores. Well, I was associated with that, as we discussed with some of you in the morning class. I structured that project. I had that privilege on the invitation of Government of Kerala. And it succeeded, and you'll get a lot of investment. But such cases are very few and far between. And it did not happen as an initiative of the central government. It was an initiative, 10-year-old initiative of the Government of Kerala. Right? So we are not seeing a national thrust on PPP. It has, if you read the budget speeches, last two budget speeches of the finance minister, a lot of lip service has been paid to PPP as a panacea for investment in many, many sectors. But conversion of that into reality is still awaited and is not in sight at this point of time. So these are, in my view, some of the serious challenges. And before you raise the red flag, I'd like to conclude that I do not have very substantive expectations, because the job is very tough, but I expect a huge balancing act, populist announcements, lip service to various concepts, and so on and so forth. So it will be a very kind of tightrope kind of walking in this budget. That's all I expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think, just to summarize what you said, so you are expecting some populist moves, not only because of demonetization effects, but also because elections are coming, and that you feel is going to make it hard for the government to spend where it is really needed, which is... That's right. So this is also going to increase fiscal deficit and at the cost of capital spending. So that will...
The growth story remains.
But you are also hopeful, or at least you feel that the economy has a robust, strong macroeconomic fundamentals. So with that, the first round of comments are over. Shall we, if the organizers permit, have a quick second round where I give each panelist 5 minutes for any secondary comments before I throw open to the audience? And I hope questions are there. Are you collecting questions? Anyone? Okay, so I'll take the questions in another 10 or 15 minutes. So if I could go back in the order and start with Professor Athreya, do you think financial inclusion, which is one of the sub-themes of the discussion today, financial inclusion and this Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar, mobile banking number trinity, direct benefits transfer, this can make a serious dent to poverty or even inequality in our country? Other than this, if you have any other comments which you felt got missed out, please feel free to address them now.
Yeah, first responding to the chair, I don't know about serious dent. They could make some impact, but I think also they are hyped up quite a bit, because I think the term financial inclusion is not well defined. Merely because I can have an account in a bank, that doesn't constitute financial inclusion. My eligibility for borrowing matters, assets matter. So without any basic restructuring of asset distributions, merely having a bank account is not going to sort out the financial inclusion problem, but it will be a good step to have that. And the other thing is about the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile link. There's a techno-fix mentality at work. I mean, it certainly matters, it will help. I mean, technology is all to the good and one should use it. But one must also look at the available infrastructure that makes the technology workable. And also look at data protection issues vis-a-vis Aadhaar. Aadhaar is a tricky issue. I just don't want to go along with the government's continued defiance of a case which is still pending in the Supreme Court, while they took the subterfuge of getting the Aadhaar bill passed by calling it a money bill and not going to Rajya Sabha. So, I mean, this is a tricky, dicey area, but I think in principle, yes, use all modern technology to try and get to the more efficient delivery of benefits. But mind you, this is direct benefit transfer. The kind of suggestions that we can go to cash transfers and do away with procurement and public distribution, those are very dangerous suggestions in my view, and the kind of Santaram committee kind of reports suggestions are not suggestions that I consider appropriate at all, because the question of price support to farmers is critical, and I think the question of publicly, or at least publicly monitored and privately or publicly owned network of ration shops is important. So on that, those are my comments on the Jan Dhan Aadhaar. Possibilities, yes, but hype, not a good idea. And certainly not to be used as an indirect route to get rid of the procurement and public distribution system. Some questions have come up which I thought I should just look at. I agree with our last speaker that yes, budgets by themselves can't do a whole lot, and at the same time I don't think that budgets do not matter. They matter to the extent that they provide an occasion for public discussion of the policies of the government and for understanding who the government supports and who it hurts. And these are politically important things. Political economy of the budgets is important. Of course, this is clouded a great deal by the way media cover it, but that's a problem we have to live with. The other point about infrastructure is very well taken. In fact, in the last 16-17 budget, if I remember right, the capital spending in the budget itself was 1.6% of GDP or something as low as that. So it's a very serious issue there, and I think that you are absolutely on target there. Now, Make India has remained largely a slogan, but I want to come back to the suggestions on taxes. I'm very impressed with the very concrete suggestions came from my friend Mr. Ramana. But I do think, for example, that direct taxes remain important. And if you're going to lower rates, there is a certain obligation on your part to remove exemptions. You can't have it both ways. So on direct taxes, there is a strong case. You quoted some figures, but in fact, when Raghuram Rajan was asked this question, he did make the point about US tax rates being much higher. And remember, in India, the effective tax rate of corporates is much less. It's 21%. So one can't keep quoting 33%. The effective tax rate is much less. There is really scope for better, more effective taxation of corporate incomes. And there is an argument for phasing out concessions in respect of indirect taxes. They've been around a long time. So there are possibilities of mobilizing revenue. They should be examined. But of course, one doesn't want to be punitive. One doesn't want to, destroy the growth possibilities and all that. All those caveats are always there. On GAR, General Anti-Avoidance Regulation, we've been postponing it, and finally when it is about to come back, I understand your point about not using it to harass a small guy. But I don't think a general removal of GAR is a good idea at all. It should remain, and it should target the very large guys. That's the point I want to make on that. On demonetization, I didn't say much in the first round because it's not central to the budget. But I do think that there are certain political processes associated with demonetization, the way the debate has been framed, which are very disturbing. Although this is not a discussion about demonetization, since budget also is an instrument of public policies should be allowed to be discussed frankly and fairly by people. You can't hold a position that if you don't agree with government, then you are against the country, you are anti-national, you are this, you are that. That is a very unhealthy atmosphere. I think it's important for us to restore a climate where people can honestly differ. And that's why this forum is such a good thing, that you have a discussion, you have it happening. And everybody is for country to develop better. Who's against it? So it's important to highlight, because one of the serious underlying presumptions about the whole demonetization exercise was that the PM knows best. And I don't think that's a great idea. He might know best about many things, but not necessarily about everything. And I think it's important one should be able to say that in this country honestly without being afraid of the consequences. The other thing is about GST and many other measures. See, one aspect of the budget that doesn't get discussed enough is the whole question of center-state relations and devolution. Again, this can't be addressed in one budget, I completely agree, but I think over the years there's been great centralization. There's been some pushback in recent times, but I think we still need to promote democratic decentralization in financial issues as well, to the states and to the local bodies. Thank you.
Maybe the government would say it's like demonetization, so the signal will reduce black money. You don't agree? Okay, it doesn't kill anybody. Okay. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for the rebuttal and the answers to my question. If I can move to Mr. T.K. Arun. So what I would like to know is you raised the issue of excess demand not being the only sense of instability, but the financial instability which comes from over-dependence of foreign investments and foreign borrowings. So what do you see as a solution to that? Because I think, we are starved of foreign investment. That is what we usually like to say. So can there be any solutions to this? And if there are any other comments you would like to make?
We hear regularly a lot about FDI being attracted, FDI liberalization and all that. As any student of macroeconomics knows, the amount of foreign savings that an economy absorbed is measured exactly by the size of your current account deficit. India's current account deficit is today around 1% of GDP. So this is the only foreign investment you are actually absorbing in the system. You might say you have thrown your economy open to the winds of foreign investment. That's not coming in, or it's not being absorbed. But suppose you could. Today the world is awash with liquidity. The interest rate in some European Union countries is negative. The policy rate in Japan is negative. It's close to zero in the US. They increased it recently. When this happens, imagine what happens to the governments of those countries. They have to pay pensions. They have to pay welfare payments to their population. If you fund your pensions, if you set aside a corpus on whose return you depend to pay the pensions of the people, when the interest rate drops, you have to increase that corpus to get the same return. How much can you increase? So either you increase the allocation of the corpus for meeting pension payments, or you increase the return on your investment. If you just invest them in government bonds, you'll get close to zero. What do? There are countries like India, in India, Asia and in Africa, where there is a huge potential to invest this money profitably. The infrastructure deficit that we talk about is an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to create infrastructure, generate returns, and pay off the investor. The problem is actually a paucity of 1, projects, viable projects, 2, project execution capability, 3, of a credible regulatory system which ensures that the money that is raised actually goes to fund the project and the returns generated are passed on to the investor and not eaten up by intermediaries. Suppose you could manage this. Today, companies around the world themselves sit on $10 trillion worth of money. This is the corporate surplus, 10 trillion. They don't know what to do. The money, the pension fund, so-called pension fund, which is a sovereign wealth fund of the Norwegians, is close to $800 billion. The sovereign wealth fund of all the petrol exporting countries is huge. All of them put together come to more than $2-3 trillion. The pension funds of the world, huge. Where are they putting the money? They don't know where. But if you ask them to come and invest in India today, they will not come. Because there is no guarantee that the money will be utilized safely and you will get a return. But suppose you could. So this is what you have to struggle for. Why do our banks not obey NPAs? The problem is not actually with the banks. The problem is not just with the borrowers. Also, they are also to blame. The problem is with our politics. We are very proud of our democracy. India is a great democracy. We are all happy. How many of us fund our democracy? How many of us contribute to political parties? This great Indian democracy we are so proud of is funded almost exclusively by the proceeds of corruption. You take money out from projects during implementation. You sell patronage, whether airways or licenses or coal mines or iron ore mines. You patronize the theft of power. Why is our power sector in this position? Our installed capacity in power is something like 250,000 megawatt. In peak May, when the demand for power is at the highest, hardly 150,000 megawatt is put to use. The rest cannot be put to use because there are no buyers. Our ACBs, electricity boards, are too broke to pay for the power they consume. Why? Because our politics deems it a legitimate function to patronize the theft of power. There's a polite term that is used, aggregate commercial and technical losses. Plain English, theft. Of course there are technical losses. Technical losses can be limited to 11% at most. The rest is all theft. Even today, 30% of the power that is produced in this country is not paid for. You cannot run a business like this. And who's to blame? It is a politician. In city after city, there is no drinking water supply that is reliable. There is no power that is reliable. Why? Because it costs money to manage a water supply system. Indians are trained to spend lots of money on hiring water tankers or buying water purifiers, on buying bottled water, on all kinds of things. But they will not pay 50 paisa extra per liter to the utility to spend on maintaining the infrastructure and giving you clean water. Why? Because you don't trust the utility. Your politics has trained you to believe that a politician cannot be believed and he should give things free. This paradigm must change. Now, without that, you cannot really create a situation where foreign investors will lend you their huge mass of savings, desperately seeking profitable deployment. So the function really actually is political reform. And unless we as citizens are engaged and speak up, this reform will not happen. And of course, there are the other issues of strengthening the banks, recapitalizing them, for which, of course, if the government is willing to let go of this government majority ownership, you can raise money. You can create a series of holding companies. And the holding company can be owned by the government. The holding company, say, owns 51% owned by the government. It raises money. It leverages that money. The entire corpus is used to fund capital. You can have a series of holding companies. So there are ways of doing this. But of course, ultimately you need the political will to take on this task. So politics is what constrains our economy in multiple ways. And that politics has to change. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in fact, interestingly, there were proposals, Indradhanush kind of proposals for the banking system, Bank Boards Bureau, but we don't hear about what happened to those proposals. So hopefully it will be revived in the coming union budget to solve the banking sector mess. If I can move to Mr. Ramana Kumar, yes, in the same order. Sir, what I wanted to ask is, how do you feel tax policy or tax administration can address the issue of black money, especially GST, which we believe is going to come soon? Will it reduce tax evasion, or any additional comments that you would like to make?
Oh yes, thank you. Initially to say that I wasn't in favor of removing CAR at all. I only wanted it from 3 crores to a much higher level, because the SMEs and the small, the so-called small players should not be affected by the provisions, at least at this point in time during demonetization. And secondly, what I meant by retaining the rebate is not exemption. Exemption is ATC. ATC where all your LIC, PPF, PF, etc. comes into play. But this rebate is given across the board for everybody. It is equivalent to a base exemption being extended, but you have to file the return and claim the rebate. So that rebate has to be increased rather than trying to increase the base itself was my expression. Maybe I didn't express myself enough in that. I completely agree to Professor Atreya to say that the exemptions have to be removed for more than one reasons. The exemptions have been there for too long and it is not required also. Even the gas subsidy has been removed to say that, you get it in your bank account and not have the subsidy upfront. That kind of situation has to come. There has to be subsidy for production and not subsidy for creating something. So all the exemptions now actually only the ATIA exemptions are there, which is with respect to location and stuff like that. That also has to go. The second reason why exemptions have to go is there is lot of fine reading and splitting the hair by both the professionals as well as the department or the authorities, the revenue authorities. That only feeds people like us. It is the chartered accountants and the advocates who have to defend the client, make the money. Even though at my cost, I am telling it because it's the fact. So all the hair splitting and the fine reading in between means a plural, singular interpretation. All these things have to go on. It has to be a productive practice for everybody. There should not be a postmortem is what I have always been advocating, that these exemptions have to go. With respect to black money, what Mr. Arun says, I completely agree. There is corruption almost everywhere. Right from the hospitals to the funeral services, there is corruption. There is corruption has impacted almost everybody in this country and everybody seems to accept it also. For a birth, you don't have to pay anything, but unless you pay something, you don't get a birth certificate. Even for a funeral, the rate is fixed by the government X, but unless you pay X into Y, the thing doesn't happen. That's the sorry state of affairs. 2,000 rupee note, I was discussing earlier. 200 crores of 2,000 rupee note is found in an individual's residence. Isn't it not corruption? And all that emanates for the reason that the elections have to be funded. I completely agree that to root out black money, first the political parties must be subjected to all 20,000 rupees. You don't get 5,20,000 rupees every day in order to make your election funding. No, the same thing happened sometime back in my state also, wherein all the surplus money was shown as it is given by the cadre for love and affection. Unless the political parties are subjected to that, even a small councillor within the third year of his being a councillor in a state legislature or even in a panchayat or a corporation, he drives a Mercedes Benz. After 25 years of practice, I can't even think of acquiring myself a Mercedes Benz. All because of corruption. If you buy a house, you have to pay somebody. If you sell a house, you have to pay somebody. Registration, some money. That is corruption rooted everywhere, and all the only reason is because of the political parties. Earlier, during the days of yore, the intellectuals and the well-read people used to come into politics. Now it is not the case, and even the bureaucracy is subjected to such amount of harassment. And I come from a state where people don't just stand; they just lie down in front of the leaders. It's a very serious issue. Why? All because of money. Money plays such a large part. So to root out black money, first is you catch the bigger fellows. Bring about a legislation that initially if you have black money of up to 1 crore, no problem. And you just target the larger fishes, the sharks, the so-called land sharks, the mining sharks, everybody, and try to bring that into the fray. GST. GST will root out the checkposts. All the checkposts in all the places will root out. So that much of litigation, if you go to the High Court, checkpost litigation forms around 40 to 50% of all the litigation. That will completely be rooted out. GST is transforming itself from a manufacturing-based tax to a consumption-based tax. So if I want to set up my factory in Kerala, why should the Kerala government give me a subsidy? Why should the Kerala government give me a grant to have my factory here? Is a question to be observed. The way the business would think about investment, especially in the GST area, will have a paradigm shift. From a consumption base, it is going to be a consumption based. If the product is consumed in my state, I pay the tax, and it reaches either the center or the state. That would be the situation in a GST. How would it root out black money? GST in the present form is only old wine in new bottle. The central sales tax is in another form. The VAT is in another form, and the integrated sales tax is in another form. It is only the nomenclature which has been changed. 4%, 12%, 18%, 26%. 4 rates are there, and now there will be litigation with respect to classification, whether it is 4% or 26%. The business is not clear about it. Again, it is the people who will, like me, who will have to defend the clients. Chanakya in Arthashastra, somewhere he has mentioned that during the times of famine, it is the thieves and the vultures will rule the roost. That might be the situation even now. There is no productive litigation. There is no productive, kind of a practice. It is only reactive. Everything would become a post-mortem. Whether it is 4% or 26%, I will engage the top lawyers. I will travel up to the Supreme Court and come back. So, by the time everything happens, the assessee is not there. Or even the decision is not useful to him. No, that's the fact. With the backlog of litigation in the courts, in all the courts, right from Supreme Court to the Municipal Court, if you see, the amount of litigation which is, still pending is enormous. I think I will live with it. I don't want a red card. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the response and the comments. Mr. Gajendra Haldia, you had flagged the problem of infrastructure financing not being there, and the government may not be in a position to step up to do that. So then what is the solution? Can you suggest any ways how to revive infrastructure financing through capital market or any other specific measures?
Not an easy question to answer, because infrastructure financing by the private sector requires a clear policy and regulatory framework which enables private investors to put their money at risk, which attracts them and assures them that their money will not be at risk, there will be fair play, and if they are efficient, they will be able to make returns. In an environment which is arbitrary, in an environment which is corrupt, where the politicians and the bureaucrats may rule the roost, take arbitrary decisions, exercise their discretion for a price, either you don't get private investment, or people price all these risks and pad up the costs. So if I know that I may have to pay X% to a minister and Y% to a bureaucrat and something to somebody and something to tax people and so on, then I pad up my costs to accommodate all this and also have a safety margin. That increases the cost of the infrastructure or any other activity for that matter, and it creates gradually a high cost economy where you get into a vicious circle of high cost economy, not allowing further growth to happen. This has happened in a couple of countries already, and it's a known phenomenon. So, now it is not as if this problem cannot be addressed. Let's take the case of power sector. Mr. Arun pointed out that we have 250,000 megawatts sitting in capacity, but electricity is not being bought from them, or it's not being bought to their capacity. Only 150,000, 160,000 being bought. Why is it happening? It is happening because, I'm just giving you this illustration so that it becomes clear where the problems lie. This happens because in India, despite all liberalization in other sectors, power sector continues to be completely in the stranglehold of the government. Why? Because of corruption, because of thefts, leakages, controls, power, authority, a host of factors. So what does that mean? Every producer in India who produces electricity can only sell his electricity to the government or a government-owned corporation. So if I have a power station, I have to look around for a state-owned distribution companies to buy power. I cannot sell it to you directly. You may be having a big steel plant requiring 20 megawatts of power, but I cannot sell it to you. I have to sell it to a DISCOM, which will add up all its inefficiencies, all its thefts, jack up the price, and then sell it to you. Now, is it over? 2 minutes. 2 more minutes? Okay. So when this happens, when electricity has to be bought by state-owned companies, which we all know are making losses, and a macro number is that for every 1 rupee of every 1 unit purchased and sold, there is a loss of 1 rupee. So the more you buy, the more you lose. And how do you get that money? So the distribution companies buy less. They curb the demand. They do blackouts. They don't supply electricity because they want to buy less. So there is electricity produced and there is latent demand, but the government stands between. Right? This is very simply stated the problem of the power sector in India. It's not as if this occurs, this problem is not solvable. Well, I had the privilege of writing the Electricity Act in 2003, which remains to be implemented. And this problem has been very satisfactorily addressed in the entire developed world. But corruption, inefficiency, controls, permit Raj, license Raj still prevails in some sectors, and so you pay the price. Now, well, you asked me a difficult question, so can I take a minute or two extra?
Yeah, so we have 2 more minutes now.
Thank you very much. Now, take the example of a project right next door. I mentioned Vision. For 10 years it could not be done because the effort to structure it and the effort to get infrastructure financing was flawed. Now, I'm not saying it's, I did it so it succeeded. No. What I'm saying is that it's not rocket science. If I could do it, many others can. Provided you you fix it properly and you observe the right principles and practices. Okay? Anyone can do it. So we got 8,000 crores at a time when infrastructure financing is at its lowest ebb, when markets are not healthy, when private investors are shying away. We got 8,000 crores of financing. So, despite the problems and challenges, it is possible to get private investment. If the costs are higher, they will price it slightly higher, but then you have to pay the market price when you go to the market. But it is possible to get private investment, both in India, both from Indian companies and from foreign companies, provided you get your framework, your policy and your regulatory acts together. And when I mentioned in my earlier observations that the government has lost focus, what I was saying was that the government is not focused on addressing these problems and resolving them and encouraging or enabling investors to come forward and invest and create infrastructure. So that capital formation is not happening, that investment is not happening. So that will slow down the growth process. That will make all your enterprises costlier and less efficient because infrastructure will cost more, electricity will cost more, transportation will cost more, so on and so forth. So infrastructure financing, you can do lots of things yourself, but provision of infrastructure has to be enabled by the government. You can't do it. And this is one of the core activities of the government in order to enable acceleration of growth. Unfortunately, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a lot of lip service to PPP, but I haven't seen specific policies. I haven't seen flow of investment. I have not seen improvement in investor sentiment. I've seen a sharp decline in banking. So we have serious problems in infrastructure financing. I will conclude by saying that this is doable, can be done, and has to be done. But the government has to get down to it.
Thank you, sir. So we'll move to the question and answers session now. So we are behind schedule, but we'll try to take as many questions as possible. So questions have already come in. Thank you, organizers, for the promptness. So the first question is for Professor Venkateshatriya. This comes from Sai Vishal, who is a student at XIME. The question is, what would you expect from the budget in the field of education? Will the government schools and colleges get any kind of upliftment from the budget?
You see, a lot of education is in the state budgets. The central's role is limited. But what you can expect is that what one might like to see is a revisiting of the central government's attitude to higher education, where the investments have been quite low, and this is an area where if India wants to develop independent S&T capability and innovative capacity, we need to really fund higher education in a much better, much more generous way than we've been funding it. But unfortunately, at the moment, higher education is seriously problematized by other issues like the kinds of issues we've had over the last year and a half in higher education institutions. One where a scientific inquiry is being seriously contested, and a different kind of atmosphere is beginning to emerge in many places. So this is a very worrying development. I think as far as the schools are concerned, MHRD will of course spend. One of the good things that has happened over the years, in my view, is that thanks to the Supreme Court's intervention, things like midday meal schemes have got regularized, and has really led to a significant improvement in enrollment and in retention. The next step, of course, would be achievement and learning outcomes, and on that, a lot of pressure has to come from below, from people, from parents, from so on. And across the states, there is a serious neglect of state schools. And the middle class, of course, has seceded and gone into its own private schools. So the larger issue in education is not just the union budget. But in the union budget, I would like to see an enhanced allocation for human resource development in general, and certainly for schooling. But the center's role must be more of an enabler. I don't want the center taking over the functions of the states and the local bodies. As far as possible, we should push school education right down to the elected local bodies, with some guidance from the state government at some level. But we must expect the center to share its financial responsibility in that process.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. T.K. Arun. This comes from Binu Jacob. It's slightly related, but it refers to the point you made that in tax rates in India are comparable with countries elsewhere, but the services that are provided to the citizens are not comparable. So what can be done to utilize tax revenues efficiently to ensure better services which can improve our Human Development Index?
If you become a Malayali, this is possible. Kerala has better delivery of services from the government than in any other state in this country. This is because the people of Kerala know their rights, demand it, and insist that it will be delivered. Of course, this is constrained by union politics, which prevents, which sort of empowers people as a section, but disempowers society as a whole. The bus conductor is organized and emboldened not to stop the bus where the bus is supposed to stop. But if he goes to the hospital, he's at the mercy of the nurse who's organized and not to deliver service. Who in turn, when he suffers a power cut at home, he's at the mercy of the organized KSEB employee who refuses to repair the power failure because he cannot be penalized because he's organized and strong. So we are sectionally organized and collectively disempowered. So, this can be fixed, but by and large, in terms of getting services, while the people of Kerala living in Kerala are obviously dissatisfied with the level of service they get, this is far superior to what people in other parts of the country get. So, democratic empowerment is the first route to getting services delivered. Second, the key, education, for example. The latest Economist, last week's Economist has an article on the education system in South Africa. South Africa spends 6.5% of GDP on education. We struggle to make it 4% of GDP. In South Africa, they recently made secondary school teachers take the test their students are supposed to take. And 74% of the teachers failed. And the results of the education system are abysmal. So unless there is proper training of teachers, and more importantly, of accountability of teachers and their monitors, these headmasters and school administrations, you will not get results. So just money from the budget is not enough. You need the mediating mechanisms of accountability and the ability of people to exercise control over those who are supposed to act on their behalf. This is the essence of the problem in democracy. We, the people, are supposed to be sovereign. And every civil servant, every elected politician is supposed to work on our behalf. But how do you achieve this? Ideally, a decentralized government should place every civil servant at the disciplinary control of the elected body at that level. If that happens, then things will change. That unfortunately hasn't happened much, although some progress was made at some phase in Kerala's decentralization experiment. I used to work at the State Planning Board in some time in Kerala. So when a doctor at a primary health center and a veterinary doctor at a health center village objected to being made accountable to a village officer who is just a 10th pass, how can I report to him? Because if you make the panchayat the disciplinary authority over all service delivery providers at that level, then this will happen. So as a compromise, it was agreed that the disciplinary recommendation will be made by the panchayat, but it will be executed through the state government. But this compromise didn't eventually work, and I think the system ceased to be dysfunctional. So democratic empowerment is a way to actually make services deliverable. And for that, a primary requirement is actually funding politics transparently. If politicians have to take money out of the system to fund themselves and their politics, then service delivery will definitely be impaired. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Ramana Kumar. It comes from Vinita Balakrishnan, who is a government pleader at the High Court of Kerala. So the question is, can we expect any of these in the next budget? One, more incentives. So I suppose the question means tax incentives for digital payments. And secondly, no tax payments on pension income.
Tax incentive on digital payments have already been introduced, but not in the tax front. But the banks have been asked not to charge the service charge on the credit card and other payments. For petrol, you don't have a credit card service charge and stuff like that. But the companies which administer these payments, for those companies, there is a strong expectation that there might be some SOPs. But again, as I said, SOPs will not be an end, or an incentive would not be an end to the whole issue. It has to be looked in another way. Merely having some exemptions for the SOPs may be a short-term solution, but long-term solution, I don't know. What would be the long-term solution for these companies, especially the banking companies who are foregoing 2% of the service charge on the credit card? In fact, there was a message in the WhatsApp which said that the biggest fraud which has been happening here is for every lakh of rupees, there is a cascading effect of the service charge with the bank. So that itself is the biggest scam in India. That has to be addressed. We don't know. So only as we go about, we'll be able to look at it. What's the second question? Pension. Now the pension is exemption tax. Especially the new pension scheme is EET. There has been a lot of debate to say that the LIC policies or the other PF, PPF would also come from an exemption mode. So investment is exempted, the accruals is exempted, the ultimate withdrawal is also exempted as of now. There is a strong feeling that the government might change it to an exemption tax mode. That meaning an LIC policy or a PPF account, on investment it is exempted, you have the tax rebate, 10, 20 or 30% as the case may be. And the accruals, if any, the bonuses in the LIC policy or the interest which we receive on the public provident fund account is exempted as of now. And the ultimate withdrawal on the maturity of the policy or after 15 years or whenever you withdraw the PF is also exempted. But with respect to the national pension scheme which has been introduced a couple of years back, it is on an exemption taxable mode. So once you withdraw that money, that is going to be taxable. There is a request that also be made into an EEE mode, exemption. But frankly, personally, if you say, considering all the fact that you already have an upfront 30% return on investment on your investment, say if you pay 50,000 rupees on an EPS, on a national pension scheme account, straight away you have a return of 15,000 in that with respect to the savings of taxes. So why should it be exempted again is one question which very many people are taking. But going by the mood of the government, as the other experts have also shared, it might not be on an EET mode. It will be either changed into an EEE mode, or the existing situation would be continued. It's my expectation from this.
Thank you for the response. The next question is for Mr. Gajendra Haldia. The question is from Chandni Thadani, who is a student at XIME Kochi. Can a single window clearance system solve the problem of infrastructure financing and high infrastructure costs?
No, not really. I mean, the problem is not in an infrastructure project. The problem is not so much about clearances. The problem is structural. The problem is, institutional. Getting some clearances here or there is a challenge, but not a major challenge. And even if you put them all together, it's very difficult to get environment people sit in the same room as tax people and then give a single window clearance. So too much has been made about single window clearance. That's not really necessary. What is necessary is speedy and more efficient, transparent clearances. That's more important. And what's important is structural reforms. I told you about the power story. If you are living in London, you can buy electricity from 12 competing companies. If you are sitting anywhere in India, you can only buy from your area distribution company, which is a state-owned inefficient monopoly. You have no choice. So the problems are of a very different order. Single window clearance is a problem which is much lower in the ladder of problems, and it really doesn't help much.
Yeah.
Continuing to what Sir said, there has to be a standardization. If there is a proposal for a similar project, all the issues which have been looked into or not looked into for a previous project has to be carried on here. Only then there will be a certainty for the investors to come. Sometime back, I think way back in 2008 or somewhere, Tamil Nadu was acknowledged as the second best investment destination in the world or something like that after the Queensland, Australia. There we found there was a single window operation which the Tamil Nadu government had. I also had the opportunity to interact with the single window and the commissioner and have a few projects solved. One thing what he did was, it was not an arbitrary decision by the officer. If there were certain concession passed on to like the most favored nation clause, if there was a clause which was omitted or ignored or amended or diluted for a particular project, that was carried on to the all future projects also, so that there was an amount of certainty for the investors to come in and also have a precedent by which easy flow was actually happening. Thank you.
Thank you. There are many more questions, but I'll use the moderator's discretion now, but we'll have another round. So the next question is for Professor Venkatesh Athreya. It comes from Moin Khan. The question is, perishable industry has been mainly affected by demonetization, but I suppose he would mean the informal sector. So perishable industry in the informal sector. Shouldn't the government compensate the sector for this? And if I may slip in another question, which is anonymous, but it talks about whether rupee is backed by gold or rupee is linked with the dollar. And if the dollar is going to collapse, is it going to cause a financial crisis for the Indian economy?
Yeah. Well, the rupee is not backed by anything material in that sense. And the dollar's prospect of collapsing is nowhere on the horizon at the moment. So I think we'll leave it at that. But yes, in the longer term, one can have interesting possibilities to speculate about. But at the moment, neither of these is really an issue. And as long as public trust and confidence in the rupee remains, things are going to work. But that's possibly one fallout of demonetization might be that people will think twice before they put the cash back in the banks. That is certainly a concern that some of us have, but we'll have to wait and see how it works out. On the question about perishables, I think what the question I had in mind was things like vegetables and fruits which had to be abandoned. Every day in Coimbatore, in Chennai, huge amounts of vegetables that we abandoned. I think that's a very legitimate point. Not just the perishable producers have to be compensated. People in Tirupur who are working in small and medium enterprises, where the entrepreneur employing them had a weekly wage bill of 10 lakhs, but was entitled only to a current account credit of 50,000 rupees. He just packed and sent them all home. So these are serious job losses, and working people, daily wagers who lost their livelihoods need to be compensated. Unfortunately, in our country, we have no rules for these things. They are very expendable. If this had happened to a big guy, there would have been a hue and a cry. But we have an economy where we don't really care about the daily wager or the small and tiny entrepreneur. We need to really address these issues in some systemic reform as well. But at the moment, I would say yes, there is a fair demand for compensation. I don't know how one would organize it, because there's huge numbers and traceability is an issue and so on. But maybe the best way to do it is therefore to provide substantial relief to small and medium enterprises and to working people. One possibility, of course, is to expand the scope of both the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and also bring in an Urban Employment Guarantee Scheme, but have them administered effectively, because the standard argument is, oh, money is being wasted. It doesn't have to be wasted. It can be organized effectively with local body participation. And that is, I think, one way is employment guarantee. I think the point that Mr. Ramana made earlier, try and ensure that the incentive to employment is given in the taxation policies. Some of those things can be done, but I think some serious compensation is needed. Yes, I agree.
Thank you, sir. The next question is for Mr. T.K. Arun, but I'll club two questions in the interest of time. So the first question relates to the Chakravyuh economy and the issue of exit. So do you think there are inefficient firms which need to be allowed to exit, and how can government, what can government do to accelerate exit of inefficient firms? That is one question. The second question is a very interesting one. It has come from Twitter, and the organizers have marked it as priority, and also there's a star. So I think you would have to take this, which is, has social media and ads on social media reduced the space for sales of newspapers, especially in Kerala?
Yeah. The first question, of course, I try to explain this. If an enterprise has failed, then it should be liquidated. That is the exit from the Chakravyuh. Right now, before this bankruptcy code was enacted, the company would be referred to the BIFR, and the BIFR would sit over it for 5 years, 6 years. And in that period, the industrialists would have actually taken their money out long ago. The banks wouldn't get their money. The land would not be available for any other enterprise. The workers would be hanging around in the hope that some settlement will come about. And it is completely dysfunctional. Instead, it should be liquidated immediately. And all the resources which are trapped in that failed enterprise redeployed, so that it becomes productive again. This is what this system is. The second question, and before I come to this most interesting question, let me just answer this question on the charges on credit cards, electronic things. There are three components to a charge. There is the interchange fee charged by Visa, MasterCard or RuPay. There is a charge levied by the card issuing bank. And there is a charge levied by the card acquiring bank. The card which deploys a swipe machine and into whose account the money actually comes. Now, RuPay, this charge fees came competition from three different kinds. One, RuPay charges much less than Visa and MasterCard does. RuPay is the National Payment Corporation of India's baby. Secondly, they are facing competition from the apps, the private sector apps as well as the UPI new apps, where the charges are far, far lower. Now, what Visa or MasterCard does is to actually do some accounting. It charges the card issuing bank and credits the credit card of the member whose card has been used to swipe. So the money and it transfers the money to the account of the merchant in the card, the swipe machine deploying bank. So these three functions that these people do. So the card issuing bank levies a levy, the biggest share goes to the card issuing bank because it has to bear that credit for the longest period. So it takes more. And the card acquiring banks takes a minimum fee. When volumes go up, this cost will naturally get distributed over a much larger number of transactions and can come down. Handling money is expensive for RBI. You have to print the notes. You have to transport it from bank to currency chest to distant ATMs. You have to guard this money. You have to replace it when it gets spoiled. You have to ensure that the spoiled money is actually shredded and not reintroduced back in the system. It is very costly. If you reduce the use of currency, there will be saving in this cost. Pass on this saving in the cost to subsidize this transaction. Similarly, when all transactions become digital, there is transparency as to who spent the money on what, and the government's revenue potential goes up. So the government stands to make a huge gain in terms of revenue. Pass on some of that to lower this cost. There is no reason why this cost should exceed 0.5% of the transaction cost. It can be done. It's not a big deal. But my suspicion is that competition from the apps will drive down the cost without the other things being done. Finally, about social media. Yes, social media is actually eating into the market share of newspapers, and this is not a good thing. Not because I work in a newspaper, my salary comes from the newspaper as ad revenue. A newspaper does something very important. It curates news. As a professional journalist, we have a sense of what people ought to read. It's always striking a balance between what the reader wants to read and what the editor thinks the reader should read, because it is of importance to him. It affects his life, and it's of value, and he should know. By doing this curation of the news, the newspaper creates a common public discourse which is shared by all readers of the newspaper. You take away this curation, and because you like stories about cats being saved from trees by brave young men, everybody will read those kind of stories. But you leave out large swathes of information which are vital to you as a citizen, and which will help you and inform you in making decisions about what kind of policies you support. The social media, therefore, blanks out chunks of the shared public discourse and creates echo chambers. You tweet to people who you agree with, and you read their tweets. You read the Facebook posts of people you agree with, and you read their posts. And this creates separate, segmented discourses without a unifying value, which is the bedrock of democracy. So this is not a good thing, and it is actually distorting not only newspaper revenues, but democracy itself. That is why somebody like Trump could actually get it elected, despite his obvious shortcomings.
Thank you. I forgot to acknowledge the question on exit of firms was by Nitin Nair, and the question on social media was anonymous. Okay, now let me move to Mr. Ramana Kumar. I'll club two questions. The first is from Professor Thomas George from Amity Global School, Kochi. The question is, demonetization has increased direct tax revenues, or so the government claims. Do you think that is sustainable? The second question comes from a representative from XIME. What are the various possibilities to increase R&D expenditure?
Direct tax has increased after demonetization, yes. It is only a short term, because the government has also introduced certain measures which have been coming almost on a daily basis, and the earlier promises were retracted and again something had come. The government has introduced a new measure by which the old demonetized notes, if they are deposited into the bank. Earlier there was an incentive to deposit, and then they said it was a bait actually. And the government said for all the amounts which has been deposited into the bank, you need to have an explanation. So again the intellectual brain started to work to find the loopholes in between sections and how to do this and that. And there was another circular to say that 85% would be treated as your income tax for the old demonetized notes which have been deposited in the bank. For which the government gave an explanation that there was one income declaration scheme which we had offered. If you had taken that, if you had paid 60%, you would not have paid 80%. While I'm not trying to say that, trying to hoard money or creating black money is correct, but in the present condition of the nation, it is inevitable. I have clients who pay me by cash. I said, no, you issue the check and you do the ADS. Oh, sir, I can pay you only by cash. Should I ignore that income? I can't. There are two possibilities. Either I keep the income and spend cash, buy a Mont Blanc pen, fly in business class, and I burn that money, or I deposit it into the bank. If I deposit into the bank, I have to give an explanation to the income tax department as to from where I got the money. I can only say other sundry clients. No. You furnish the PAN number, you furnish the invoice number. Those kinds of harassment, and in the short term what happens, there are additions into my income, which actually notionally increases the tax amount or the tax amount which I have paid. Direct tax has increased obviously because there is lot of slashed money which has come into the banking system, and as a preventive measure and as a safety measure out of abundant caution, the assessees have paid the advance tax on it. Whether the department will agree to it, or whether there will be a refund claim to it, or there will be some other notification, we don't know. But all said and done, there has been an increase in the direct tax collection, which is only a short term. It will be that maximum up to March 31st. By the time, the economy would learn the ways to amend itself. The thing is R&D expenditure. Yes, R&D expenditure, as I told during my initial remarks also, weighted deduction for R&D expenditure is extremely important. Biotechnology is a very, very good avenue. My daughter wanted to be a biotechnology professional, but she was actually dissuaded because there are only 300 companies in India which do research on pharma. Every other thing is being brought up from outside. As I told earlier, there is no transfer of technology. There is only using the technology which has been developed outside of India into it. So in order to develop the research and development, do you mean to say that the Indian minds are not good in research? There is one software which we use for our photography. It's actually called Adobe. That Adobe Photoshop, if you see, the first 50 people who have developed the softwares are all Indians, are all South Indians. So there is enough brain in the Indian population to do research, but there is no infrastructure, and there is no proper funding, and the companies are not able to, invest in that amount of thing. All the constraints which you have, but in order to ease it, if there is an extra kind of an 200% weighted deduction for every lakh of rupees you spend, you get an income tax. You can claim it as an you can claim it as an expense into two. Say 200% is one way to suit it, but otherwise, as I said earlier, Income Tax Act is being used to administer various other small acts, and also various other economic policies of the government are being administered through the act. So if there is a real intent to improve R&D in India, all these things have to be done. Recently, there was about 4 years back, there was a circular to say that for job work R&D done in India, the patent has to be with India. And then the government ultimately revoked that notification. There has to be certainty in that also. Unless the government forms a long-term strategy or a long-term framework for R&D, there is an issue in it. Yes, there is an issue.
Thank you, sir, for your response. The last set of questions is for Mr. Gajendra Haldia. I'll club two questions. The first is by Sulgeet, whose question is, what is your view on Dr. Manmohan Singh's statement that demonetization is organized loot and legalized plunder? The second set of questions, they all talk about demonetization's benefits, because I think you mentioned there could be mid-term or long-term benefits. How can we quantify those benefits?
Dr. Manmohan Singh's statement must be read as a political statement coming from the opposition, right? So I do not want to, enter into a political debate. That's best avoided in a forum like this. But there is no denying the fact that in the course of demonetization, all of us witnessed a host of malpractices. There was an expectation expressed in government statements that 3 lakh crores may not come back, and the system may benefit by the disappearance of that much black money, so to say. The facts as they have turned out are that probably no more than 75,000 crores will get immobilized or cancelled. So the objective of immobilizing large sums of black money really hasn't been achieved. And what we have witnessed is a recovery of large amounts of new currency notes, like you mentioned, in multiple places. Now, if you have seen multiple cases being caught, you can be assured that a much larger proportion has got unnoticed. They have not been caught. Only a small proportion gets caught. Now, where did all this money come from? If you and I go to a bank, with all our effort, in 1 week, we can maximum withdraw 24,000 rupees. So where is all this money coming from? Surely all of us are not withdrawing 24,000 rupees each by standing in queues twice or thrice in a week and then giving it to somebody to accumulate into 100 crores or 200 crores. All that money has come through corrupt means and corrupt channels. And real black money has got exchanged in a fraudulent and corrupt manner. So whether you call it corrupt, whether you call it loot, whether you call it irregular, whatever you call it, a huge amount of illegality has been witnessed. So any claim that this is cleansing the system gets compromised. Secondly, when more than 90% of the cash has come back, so where have you got the black money? It has been captured. Most of the money has been laundered, so to say. It has come through different means. And the point is that government should have realized, in my view, that look, money is such a liquid commodity, and we have a population of 125 crores or more, that the state cannot police its possession and its movement at such a large scale. It is futile to believe that you can do it ever. So it will find ways like water. It will travel through some hole or some crack and find its level. I do not expect anybody having illegal money of even 10,000 rupees willing to tear it up or bury it or burn it. He'll find a way. He'll give it to somebody in charity who will use it in turn. Or he will give it for 20% discount, 30% discount, 40% discount. That money is not going to get wiped out. So the entire expectation was incorrect. And it has led to all kinds of innovative ways and jugaad as we call it, in people trying to get these notes exchanged. Right? So whoever had the money and the rich and the black marketeers have found their ways. And you and I are left standing in a queue. So who has benefited, we don't know. And what will it achieve? Has it reduced corruption? No. If I am a babu sitting somewhere and I want you to pay me 10,000 rupees to give you a clearance, am I going to be deterred by the old note or the new note? I am going to demand the same. And if you can't pay it now, I'll hold back your work, or I'll give you an IOU, or I'll find some way. But I'm not going to become a moralist because the notes have changed or the currency is looking different. So corruption, containing corruption is a very different ball game. It's a question of systems, it's a question of surveillance, it's a question of incentives and disincentives. Like GST will contain corruption. GST will reduce black transactions. That's a systemic approach. Most welcome. But change in currency doesn't do all that. So I have from day one believed that it was a ill-conceived move. So even if the notes had to be changed, they should have been changed in a more gradual and systematic manner without causing undue pain to the entire population, virtually. There has never been an operation that I have known or heard of which has affected such a large number to such a great extent without corresponding gains. Now, the gains may be digitization. Digitization is welcome, but that's a change in behavior pattern. That's a change in habit. My suspicion is that, well, you are forcing people, so some people have used digitization for a while. Some may continue, so that will be a net gain. But a large people may go back, a number of people may go back. Because if I have to pay you 10,000 rupees and you are a shopkeeper and you say, if I demand an invoice or if I want to pay by credit card, then I have to pay not 10,000 but 11,000 rupees, then I have an incentive not to pay by digital means. Right? That's what persuades shopkeepers and buyers to stay away from.
4 objectives were advanced in the original address to the nation on demonetization: ending of corruption, ending of terrorism, ending of counterfeit currency, and ending of black money. It's clear that none of those 4 have really happened, and they could not have happened in the nature of things. Corruption is not a one-time activity. Terrorist money comes through fairly legal channels, including your participatory notes, which have not been touched. And counterfeit currency is a very small proportion of the total currency in circulation. Black money has been adequately explained, so I just want to emphasize that point from our side.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just very quickly summarize half a minute. So I think the eminent panel agrees that demonetization is going to have serious adverse short-term effects, but then there were a lot of suggestions for how the union budget can provide momentum to the economy, especially by increasing tax revenues, which should be used for capital spending, because infrastructure is one of the areas which is being hit for a long time. So I think the panel also believed that the macroeconomic fundamentals are quite robust, and the government has a very unique opportunity to be, or unique choice between being populist or being decisive, and we all hope that the government will choose the latter. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much, all our distinguished panelists. Big round of applause, not only for them, but for the audience for being so patient.
Thank you, sir. Actually, due to the time constraints, now we have to finish the session. That was really a great experience for all of us to hear from the subject experts. Now, there are some more sessions to be continued.
As a token of appreciation and gratitude, we are honored to felicitate our distinguished panelists. For this, I request Professor Rajesh Upadhyaylu, the chair of IIMK Kochi campus. First, sir, please. Firstly, to Sri Gajendra Haldia, IAS. Professor Venkatesh Atreya. To Shri T.K. Arun. To Shri Ramana Kumar. And to Professor Rudra Sensen. Thank you, sir. Now I invite Liz Thomas, the Student Council representative of IMK Kochi campus, to deliver the vote of thanks.
So here we are towards the close of the panel discussions. The time has come to express our deepest appreciation and gratitude to all the people and the guests who made this occasion a very memorable success. I'm really honored to be chosen for this task, and it's an impossible one. Without much delay, may I start? So our panelists have come across from various parts of India, and they have shared their experience, wonderful insights, and their expectations of the union budget. May I first thank Sri Gajendra Haldia, IAS, former advisor, infrastructure and PPP, to the Planning Commission. Thank you very much, sir, for gracing this occasion. You were one of the first panelists to confirm and accept our invitations about 7 months ago, and we had the privilege to spend the best of yesterday's evening with you. We heard your views on demonetization, GST, startup. You also graciously agreed to address the students' panel. We look forward to spend more time before you leave. Thank you very much again. Our next panelist, Mr. T.K. Arun, editor, opinion at Economics Times, accepted our invitation without hesitation despite his hectic schedule today. Sir, we thank you very much for your reviews and for giving us a perspective from current affairs. We hope you had a wonderful time in the discussion, as much as we had the pleasure to listen to it. Thank you once again. Our next panelist, Professor Venkatesh Atreya, economist and advisor to M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation. Sir, your views in demonetization and fiscal deficit during your morning session was very thought-provoking, and it was complemented beautifully by the panel discussion this evening. Thank you very much for being with us. To all of you who had come here, we know that you had festivals that you would rather be with. We wish you a happy Makara Sankranti and Lori and Bhai Dooj. So, Mr. C.A. Ramana Kumar, founder of Overpax Legal, Chennai, is our final panelist. Sir, your views from the perspective of a common man and taxation changes expected is a fresh anchor to the panel discussion. Thank you very much for accepting your invitation and gracing this occasion. Despite being Pongal, we know that your schedule was hectic. You're starting to Bangalore tomorrow as soon as you reach home. And our gratitude for being so flexible in your travel plans has to be expressed. On behalf of IMK, ungalku engaloda Pongal Vaalthukal, sir. Our panel discussion moderator comes from our very own IIMK Kozhikode faculty. Professor Rudra Sensarma is professor in economics, IIMK chair in research office. We are really sorry that you didn't get to use your yellow card and red card. The panelists are so smart. And we had expectations when we actually made it that we would have done a bet, but then that's not the part of the deal. But the moderation that the panel discussion had from you, which would have really made our football team proud. Thank you very much for the guidance, for the leadership, and throughout the discussion. My duties now extend to those who have supported us with sponsorship, our platinum sponsors, New India Assurance. Thank you very much, Mr. John Philip, DGM, New India Assurance, who was here with us, visited with us, and spent time with us. We would also like to thank other delegates of NIA and Thomas Sebastian of NIA, who is also a scholar of EPGPM. Thank you very much for your sponsorship. In random order, we would like to extend our sincere appreciation for the sponsorship and support given to us by the following sponsors: EKK Infrastructure, ACC Cements, Space and Builders, UST Global, RIA Group, PK Tile Center, So Many Ceramics, Met Clouds, Inmakes, KSIDC, Splintroids, and Verde. This event would not have been possible without the watchful eyes and the very critical and very thorough guidance of two personalities, Professor Abhilash S. Nair, Professor in Finance and Accounting and Control, and who drove a weekly, daily update request, a workforce of about 60 volunteers. His meticulous plans, his experience of the previous pre-budget in which he had been moderated, was valuable for us. And another personality, Professor Rajesh S. Upadhyayula, Chairperson, Cochin Campus IIMK, Professor in Strategy area, was the second mentor we had the privilege to have. More than once he said, Liz, nothing disturbs academics, but perfection is demanded. So, what do you know? We have classes, exams after, during the event. All this said, I would still speak on the behalf of the students when I say thank you very much, sir, for driving us. The event would have never been this successful without your drive and passion. We would like to thank the faculty members of IIMK and the administrative members of IIMK and Cochin staff in the following order and not limited to: Professor Joshi Joseph, Marketing, IIMK Cochin, for the moral support; Professor V. Gopalan, Finance, for the moral support; Dr. M.G. Srikumar, CIO, Chief Librarian, and spoke for our Connect to Add Factors, PR agents; Director Professor K. Baluni, IIMK, IIM Kozhikode; Dean Academic, Professor S.S.S. Kumar; Dean Development, Professor Devabhadra Chatterjee; Manager Kochi Campus, Mr. Anu Francis, and staff, especially Mr. Bhupesh K. Chief System Managers, IIM Kozhikode, Mr. Ashok Pathak, Mr. Mustafa for tech support for live streaming; the Chief Administration Officers and staff IIMK for Rudra's travel support. We would also like to extend our thanks for this extended support network that we have in InfoPark. The InfoPark CEO, Mr. Rishikesh Nair, Administration Manager, Mr. Reggie, for all InfoPark infrastructure support. The InfoPark CI and Police team for logistics and security support. Their assistance has been valuable. Our food vendors, IRCTC, on the space above. I move on to express our sincere gratitude to a special class of support who has helped to spread the word to the larger extended organizations and audience. I would like to thank the first the Add Factor team, Ms. Meghna, Bangalore, Ms. Ambiya, Mumbai, Mr. Sanal, local spoke Add Factors, for the pre-event PR and the post-event PR. We would like to extend our heartfelt thanks for the media houses who accepted our invitation and agreed to cover this event. In random order: Mangalam, Suprapadam, Chandriga, Madhurabhumi, New India Express, Times of India, Malayalam Manorama, and our principal media partners, the Economic Times and the Asianet News, covering the live event. We would like to extend also our heartfelt thanks to the media box office for the event management, stage management, welcome kit coordination, and also the memento. The winning ways for digital marketing. We would also thank our special dignitaries, executives of invited organization, business schools of management delegates in and around Cochin, namely and not limited to Rajagiri School of Management, Bharat Mada School of Management, CUSAT, SCMSE, FISAT, Marthoma School of Management, Amity, Marian School of Management. We would also thank Thomas George for mentoring in the B School Connects. So last but not the least, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks for the class of EPGP 01, 02, 03, 04, who stood with us. This could not be possible without them. And a wonderful event it was in management with the staunch support of all our alumni, our seniors, the people who just passed out, who are in and who are actually doing their exams, and those who are not with us. We will also actually extend our core committee our heartfelt thanks, not limited to Anish P, Mritul, Miriya, Nitin, Jayasurya and Rakesh of 03, Shambhu Sashigumar, Sumita, Bedwin, Rahul, Shweta, Kavita, Vidyahari, Farid, Rastam, Ambli, Ragesh, Binu, Jacob, Ajish, Ramesh KP and Thomas Sebastian. And for the rest of the volunteers of the following team: event management, hospitality, sponsorship, registration, digital marketing, invitation, and to our greatest supporters, our family and friends, and a Providence that smile upon us. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That was a wonderful speech. Now I request everyone to kindly rise for the national anthem.
जनगणमन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
It was a wonderful afternoon, and we had a great opportunity to listen and to understand more about Budget 2017. Thank you very much, each and every one of you being such a wonderful audience. We invite all of you to join us for a high tea arranged at the first floor at the auditorium. Wish you all a wonderful evening. Have a great good evening.